My now ex-wife's father, who was also my boss, called my project meaningless and me a loser, throwing away 3 months of my work while humiliating me in front of everyone. But moments later, another company called offering a $1 million deal, which I loudly accepted, leaving everyone shocked. My name is David Chen, and I'm 29 years old. I should have known the evening would go sideways the moment we pulled up to Celestine, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. It wasn't the valet who tipped me off, though his reaction was telling enough. He looked at my 7-year-old Honda like it had somehow wandered in from the wrong side of the highway, his expression a mixture of confusion and barely concealed disdain. It wasn't the hostess either, despite her overly practiced smile. She smiled too tightly, her lips stretched into a professional grimace, while her eyes immediately skimmed right past me. Instead, her gaze locked onto the sleek black BMW that was idling behind us in the valet line, probably carrying someone with a last name that got whispered in boardrooms and country club locker rooms. No, what really told me everything I needed to know about how this evening would unfold was the way Victoria avoided my gaze when we stepped into the elevator. Her fingers were laced with mine, but they felt limp and lifeless, like she was holding my hand out of pure obligation rather than any genuine affection. It was the kind of touch that says, "You're here, but please just try not to make a scene." I'm David Chen, and I work as a marketing strategist specializing in restaurant branding. Over the years, I've learned to read a room the way a skilled chef reads smoke rising from a pan. In my world, you learn early that apparent warmth can burn you just as badly as open hostility, and that silence often cuts deeper than the most cutting insults. I've built my entire career around breathing new life into dying kitchens and failing restaurants. I started from the bottom, working with grease-stained food trucks and hole-in-the-wall taco stands in neighborhoods where your shoes would literally stick to the floor. These were places where dreams went to die, but I saw potential where others saw only problems. Now, years later, Michelin-starred establishments whisper my name behind closed doors, seeking my expertise to elevate their brands. But to Victoria's family, particularly her mother, I would always be nothing more than the guy who smelled faintly of roasted garlic and carried the unmistakable scent of ambition. No matter how successful I became, no matter how many prestigious restaurants sought my counsel, I would never be good enough for their daughter in their eyes. The rooftop at Celestine was absolutely stunning, bathed in the warm glow of carefully placed candlelight with curated jazz music floating through the air like silk. Waiters moved between tables with an almost ghostly grace, serving guests at tables so expensive they didn't even bother with printed menus. Every chair was occupied by a silhouette of perfect posture and inherited privilege, every guest draped in designer silk and the kind of confidence that money can buy. And then I saw it. The long table positioned near the glass railing with the best view of the city skyline. 10 chairs arranged in perfect formation, and 10 bodies already seated around it. Not a single person at that table moved or acknowledged us when they saw Victoria and me approaching. It was as if we had suddenly become invisible. My eyes swept across the table quickly, taking inventory of the assembled family members. Margaret Sterling, Victoria's mother, sat naturally at the head of the table like the queen she believed herself to be. Her signature pearls rested just above her collarbone like a piece of armor, carefully positioned to catch the light. Her mouth was curved at the corners in what was clearly meant to pass as hospitality, but it felt more like a smirk that had been weaponized into an insult you couldn't quite prove in court. She didn't stand when she saw us approach. She didn't even bother to raise her glass in greeting or acknowledgement. Instead, she simply narrowed her eyes with calculated precision, tilted her chin upward in that way that screamed superiority, and delivered her opening salvo loud enough for half the rooftop to hear clearly. "Oh dear," she said with perfectly practiced surprise. "Looks like we're at capacity tonight." I felt Victoria freeze beside me, her fingers immediately uncurling from mine as if my touch had suddenly become radioactive. Margaret's voice carried across the evening air again, each word dripping with sweet venom and crystal-clear diction that had been refined through decades of private education and social conditioning. "Maybe a budget place would suit you better, David," she continued, her words landing like perfectly aimed arrows. There it was, the opening jab of the evening, served chilled and right on time. I glanced around at the other family members seated at the table, reading their faces like a roadmap of complicity and cowardice. Miles, Victoria's older brother, was already looking down at his plate as if it might offer him an escape route from the uncomfortable scene unfolding before him. Her cousin Reed took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine, his eyes wide with the guilty expression of a man watching a car crash happen in slow motion. Horrified by what he was witnessing, but lacking the courage to actually stop it, the rest of the family members were nothing more than blank faces, maintaining careful distance, their expressions practiced and deliberately neutral. These were people who had perfected the art of silent complicity, who knew exactly what was happening, but would never dare speak up against Margaret's orchestrated cruelty. No one said a word in my defense. Not even Victoria, the woman I'd fallen in love with and thought would stand by my side. I stood there for a moment, suspended between two very different versions of myself and the choices they represented. There was the old me, the kid from East Tampa, who used to wash dishes in the back of a cramped fusion diner, counting coins just to afford bus fare home after long shifts. That version of David Chen would have tried to smile through Margaret's calculated humiliation, would have cracked some self-deprecating joke to diffuse the tension, and would have made peace with being treated like a second-class citizen just to avoid causing a scene. But not tonight, not anymore. Instead of shrinking under her gaze, I laughed. The sound came up from somewhere deep in my chest before I could even think to stop it. A clean, sharp sound that didn't match the soft jazz music or the suffocating tension that had settled over our little corner of the rooftop. It was genuine laughter, the kind that cuts through pretense like a blade through silk. A few heads turned from nearby tables, curious about the source of this unexpected sound. Victoria blinked in startled confusion, clearly not expecting this reaction from me. Margaret's practiced smirk wavered just slightly, a hairline crack in her perfectly composed facade. And that tiny moment of uncertainty, that brief flicker of doubt in her eyes, was all the opening I needed. "Maybe you're right," I said smoothly, my voice carrying clearly across the table without any trace of the shame or embarrassment she had been counting on. Maybe this table just isn't for me after all. I could feel the tension shift around us like a living thing, the entire dynamic of the evening suddenly thrown off balance. Victoria's hand instinctively started reaching for mine, then hesitated halfway, her fingers suspended in the air between us. She honestly didn't know what I was about to do, and truth be told, neither did I in that exact moment. But something inside me had crystallized during those few seconds of laughter. Something that had been building for months of tolerating Margaret's passive-aggressive attacks and subtle humiliations. A line had been drawn clean and bright through the middle of my chest, separating the man who would accept disrespect from the man who would walk away from it entirely. Without another word, I turned on my heel and walked away from that table. I didn't move fast or in any way that suggested I was flustered or retreating in defeat. Instead, I walked with deliberate purpose, like a man who was walking toward a truth that only he could see and understand. The maitre d' stood at the host stand near the restaurant's entrance, casually tapping something on his tablet while overseeing the evening service. He looked up as I approached, his expression already shifting into what I expected would be the standard apology or perhaps an offer to move me to a bar stool downstairs where I could eat alone and out of sight. But when our eyes met, his entire expression changed in a way that caught me completely off guard. "Mr. Chen," he said, straightening immediately with a smile that actually reached his eyes and seemed genuinely warm. "Lorenzo mentioned you might stop by tonight." There it was. The moment that would turn Margaret's carefully planned humiliation into something entirely different. You see, Margaret Sterling didn't know what she didn't know. She had no idea that I'd been working behind the scenes with Lorenzo Martinez, Celestine's owner and head chef, for over half a year. She didn't know that this very rooftop, this gleaming temple of culinary excellence that she used as her personal stage for social warfare, had once teetered dangerously on the brink of bankruptcy before I came into the picture. She didn't know that I had been the one to step in and tighten the restaurant's narrative, carefully curating every aspect of the dining experience from the lighting, to the menu descriptions, to the way the staff interacted with guests. I had transformed this place into the kind of establishment that her wealthy friends now used as Instagram currency, posting photos of their meals here as proof of their sophisticated taste and social status. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. While Margaret thought she was inviting me into her world specifically to humiliate me in front of her family, I was already stitched into the very foundation of the venue she had chosen for my public embarrassment. She had picked Celestine because it represented everything she valued: status, exclusivity, and the kind of refined power that money could buy. But what she failed to realize was that I had helped create the very atmosphere she was now weaponizing against me. "Chef Martinez left a note for you," Diego, the maitre d', continued with genuine warmth in his voice. He stepped gracefully from behind the host stand and motioned for me to follow him toward the back of the restaurant. I glanced back just once as I moved past the bar and toward the private corridor that led away from the main dining area. Margaret had leaned slightly forward in her chair, her posture shifting from confident superiority to something much more uncertain. She looked like a falcon that had just spotted unexpected movement in the trees below. Her eyes were narrowed again, but this time with something that was much harder for her to swallow: confusion. And perhaps the first stirring of genuine concern. Good. Let her wonder what was happening. Diego led me past the velvet partition that separated the public dining area from the restaurant's inner sanctum, through a narrow hallway lined with carefully curated photographs from Celestine's dramatic rebirth. These were photos that I had personally selected, stories that I had helped write through months of careful brand development and strategic positioning. The air felt different back here, calmer, more reverent, like stepping into a cathedral dedicated to culinary artistry. We reached a secluded alcove that was known only to a select few, a tucked-away chef's table that offered a perfect view of the kitchen's controlled chaos on one side and the glittering city skyline on the other. It was an intimate space that most diners never even knew existed, reserved for special occasions and honored guests. The table was set for exactly one person. A single taper candle flickered gently next to a sealed envelope that bore my name in elegant script. Diego smiled and bowed slightly with genuine respect. Not the performative deference he showed to wealthy patrons, but something real and earned. "Enjoy your evening, Mr. Chen," he said softly before disappearing back into the restaurant's bustling front of house. I pulled out the chair slowly and sat down, taking a moment to absorb the significance of where I was and what was happening. Then I carefully opened the envelope, unfolding the handwritten note inside. "To the man who gave this restaurant its heartbeat," it read in Lorenzo's distinctive handwriting, "dinner's on us. L." I smiled then. Not a smirk, not an expression of smugness or pretense, but a genuine smile of quiet satisfaction. It was the kind of deep contentment that settles into your bones and tells you that you're exactly where you're meant to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Back at the Sterling family table, I could feel Margaret's eyes boring into me from across the restaurant. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind as she tried desperately to rewrite the scene that was unfolding before her, struggling to make sense of what she was witnessing. But it was already too late for her to regain control of the narrative she had so carefully constructed. The dinner she had planned to use as my burial ground had just transformed into the night I truly came alive. And of all the tables in this world, this one, the one she had denied me access to, turned out to be something I didn't need at all. Because I had built my own table, in my own space, on my own terms. Let me tell you how Victoria and I first met, because it's important to understand how we got to this moment. We met over spilled coffee and an argument about Wi-Fi, of all things. Victoria was perched at a corner table in the graduate library, her textbooks spread around her like wings, a highlighter poised in her hand like a surgeon's scalpel. She was clearly in her element, completely focused on her studies. I had just wrapped up a meeting with a food truck owner who wanted a logo that looked rich but still spicy, whatever that meant. I'd been running on maybe 3 hours of sleep and an energy drink that had expired 2 weeks earlier, juggling freelance branding gigs and my own coursework with the delicate precision of a man trying to keep his entire future from toppling over like a house of cards. When the campus internet crashed for the 4th time that week, I muttered something not quite under my breath about institutional incompetence and the general failure of basic infrastructure. Her voice cut through the library's silence like a blade. "Maybe don't blame the library just because your tabs won't load, tech bro," she said, without even looking up from her books. That was exactly how it started between us. There was no romantic swoon, no instant spark of attraction, just pure friction and challenge. But when she finally did look up from her textbook, I completely forgot how to breathe properly. She had long, dark hair tucked behind one ear, gold-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down her nose, and she was wearing a blazer that was far too sharp and professional for a typical graduate student. She looked like a storm system that didn't need thunder to command the entire sky. I remember blinking stupidly at her, trying to recover some semblance of my dignity and wit. She raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by my momentary speechlessness. "You're new here," she said, making it sound like both an observation and an accusation. "Guilty as charged," I replied, still trying to recover some of my pride after being called out so effectively. "David Chen, branding night owl and apparent campus troublemaker." "Victoria Sterling," she responded crisply. "Corporate law student, barely surviving, and I have absolutely no time for fools or their technical difficulties." And yet, somehow, from that very first moment of mutual antagonism, we became completely inseparable. It was like we had found the missing piece of ourselves in the most unexpected person and place. There were differences between us, of course, too many if you asked her mother later on. Victoria came from a world of marble countertops and seasonal homes, where people owned multiple properties just because they could. She instinctively knew which fork went with which course at formal dinners, could speak French like the language was woven directly into her bloodline, and moved through high society with the kind of effortless grace that only comes from being born into it. Me? I was raised by a single father who worked double shifts at a hardware store, a man who taught me how to fix a leaky sink and patch drywall before I even knew how to spell sauté. I had grit, hunger, and student debt that followed me around like a loyal dog. I had ambition that burned in my chest like a constant fire, but I also had the kind of background that made people like Margaret Sterling wrinkle their noses in barely concealed disgust. She had legacy and advantage handed to her on a silver platter, while I had to fight for every single opportunity that came my way. But here's the thing. Victoria never held any of that over me. At least, not at first. Victoria genuinely liked my fire and drive. She once told me that she loved the way I talked about food, like it had memory, like taste was a kind of time travel that could transport you to different places and moments in your life. She loved that I saw brands not as simple logos or marketing gimmicks, but as complex stories, messy, flavorful, and fundamentally human narratives that connected people to experiences. We would spend hours dissecting advertising campaigns and wine labels, our passionate arguments about design and messaging inevitably spilling over into equally passionate kisses. Our individual ambitions seemed to feed off one another, like kindling feeding a fire, each of us pushing the other to reach higher and dream bigger. We were genuinely in love. This was real love, the kind that dared to dream past surface-level attraction and social expectations. The kind of love that made you believe you could overcome any obstacle as long as you faced it together. But Margaret Sterling? She sniffed me out the moment we first shook hands, like a bloodhound detecting something that didn't belong in her perfectly curated world. I still remember the first time I met her with crystal clarity. It was Thanksgiving at their sprawling estate in Coral Gables, and I had worn a blazer that was too cheap to pass even the most basic inspection. I had brought a bottle of wine that I'd frantically Googled the night before, hoping to find something that would seem thoughtful without breaking my already strained budget. She accepted the wine with one of those brittle smiles that rich people perfect, the kind that's technically polite but feels like ice water being poured down your spine. She placed my carefully chosen bottle beside the others on the dining room sideboard, where it looked like a lost orphan among the expensive vintages that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Then she turned to Victoria with that same cold smile and said, just loud enough for me to hear clearly, "You always did have a thing for fixer-uppers, didn't you, darling?" Her words weren't loud or dramatic. They didn't need to be. They were delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep while maintaining plausible deniability. But those words stuck to me like tar. And from that day forward, I became nothing more than the project in Margaret's eyes. I was the rough-around-the-edges man she was absolutely convinced Victoria would eventually outgrow, like a phase she was going through. In Margaret's perfectly manicured world, I didn't dress right, I didn't eat right, and I simply wasn't elevated enough to deserve her daughter. It didn't matter that I was burning myself out at both ends, working tirelessly to build something meaningful from absolutely nothing. It didn't matter that I was pouring every ounce of my energy into creating a successful business and a future that Victoria and I could be proud of together. To Margaret, I would always be nothing more than raw ambition, wrapped in thrift store clothing. Victoria tried to defend me. She really did. She fought back in small strategic bursts whenever her mother's attacks became too obvious to ignore. "He's not like the others, Mom," she would say with genuine conviction. "He works harder than anyone I know. He's going to change everything." But Margaret's skepticism wasn't just personal preference. It was layered, generational, and completely calcified by decades of social conditioning. Her love was conditional in the worst possible way, and her approval was like navigating a maze with invisible walls that shifted every time you thought you'd found the right path. You could never be sure what would earn her respect, but you always knew exactly what would lose it. I remember one particular evening early in our relationship that still haunts me. Victoria had taken me to a benefit gala hosted by the Sterling Foundation, one of those glittering charity events where wealthy people gather to congratulate themselves on their generosity while wearing clothes that cost more than most people's annual salaries. I wasn't on the official guest list, of course, but Victoria had insisted I come as her date. Margaret greeted me with a hug that felt more like a pat-down by airport security, her hands briefly touching my shoulders while her eyes scanned me from head to toe, cataloging every imperfection in my appearance. When she introduced me to the mayor and other prominent guests, she referred to me as Victoria's friend from school. Not her boyfriend, not her partner, just some casual acquaintance who had somehow wandered into their sophisticated world. I was wearing the one good suit I owned, a suit I had saved up for by taking on 3 additional branding gigs and using a tax refund check. I had spent weeks preparing for that evening, researching the other attendees and practicing small talk about topics I thought would impress them. But none of it mattered. To Margaret and her circle, I was transparent, visible enough to be polite to, but not substantial enough to be taken seriously. That night, when we finally got back to my modest apartment, the contrast between their world and mine felt overwhelming. I asked Victoria directly if she really thought we could make it as a couple, given the obvious disapproval from her family. Her eyes welled up with tears, but her voice remained steady and determined. "I don't care what my mother thinks," she said with fierce conviction. "She can choke on her pearls for all I care. I love you, David, and that's all that matters." That should have been the end of it. Those words should have been enough to shield us from Margaret's disapproval and create a protective bubble around our relationship. But love, as I learned, doesn't automatically erase external pressure. It just makes you more willing to absorb that pressure for a while, hoping it will eventually dissipate on its own. We ended up getting married in a small garden ceremony that represented all the compromises we had to make to find common ground. I had originally wanted a simple beach wedding, something casual and intimate that reflected who we actually were as a couple. Victoria had dreamed of a vineyard ceremony, something elegant and sophisticated that would photograph beautifully and impress her extended family. In the end, we compromised on charm over either of our original visions, settling for a quaint garden venue that satisfied neither of our true desires but seemed acceptable to both. Her father didn't show up to the wedding at all. He claimed he had a business conflict that couldn't be rescheduled, but everyone knew it was his way of making a statement about his feelings regarding our union. Her mother did attend, but she made sure to leave before the cake was cut, claiming she had developed a sudden conflict with the caterer over some trivial detail. Everyone at the wedding knew this was just code for, "I've made my point about this marriage, and now I'm done pretending to support it." Despite the family drama, Victoria and I built what I thought was a solid home together, constructing our life brick by brick through shared effort and mutual determination. I worked long hours building my branding business. She pursued her legal career with the same intensity, and we split everything down the middle. Bills, household chores, and the dreams we were working toward together. There were nights when we would dance barefoot in our small kitchen, spinning around between the refrigerator and the stove while dinner cooked on the burner. There were weekend mornings when we would argue over absolutely nothing. Whether to have pancakes or eggs for breakfast, which movie to watch, whose turn it was to take out the garbage. But even when we were exhausted or emotionally bruised from the stresses of building our careers, we kept choosing each other over and over again. Still, Margaret's presence lingered over our relationship like a persistent shadow. She would call at the most inconvenient times, always unannounced and always with some transparent excuse for checking up on us. She would drop by our home bearing little gifts that felt more like subtle insults. silk throw pillows that were clearly too expensive for our modest living room, or elegant coffee table books that seemed designed to highlight how unsophisticated our existing decor was. "Oh, you're still living in this neighborhood," she would say with feigned surprise, as if she hadn't been to our house multiple times before. Or she would run her fingers along our practical furniture and comment, "I suppose this sofa is very practical for your current situation," emphasizing the word practical like it was a character flaw. She questioned every major decision I made in my business and personal life, then would smirk with satisfaction when I held my ground instead of deferring to her judgment. It was like she was constantly testing me, waiting for me to prove that I was exactly the kind of man she had always suspected I was. Someone who would eventually reveal himself to be unworthy of her daughter's love. Victoria kept saying she was drawing boundaries with her mother, insisting that she was protecting our peace and our relationship from Margaret's interference. But despite her promises, cracks began to show in our united front. At first, they were small fractures that seemed manageable and temporary. Victoria would agree to weekend dinners with her mother, even after I had explicitly told her that I had important work deadlines that weekend and couldn't afford the time away from my projects. She would conveniently forget to mention that Margaret was joining us for what I thought would be a quiet brunch for two, leaving me blindsided when her mother appeared at the restaurant with that familiar predatory smile. Or she would quietly move our carefully planned date night to accommodate some charity function that I wasn't invited to, leaving me sitting at home alone while she mingled with her mother's social circle. Each time this happened, Victoria would offer the same weak justifications. "Just for this one night, David. Let's not make a scene about it." Or, "It's easier if we just go along with it this time." And each time I swallowed my frustration and disappointment for her sake, for the sake of our relationship, and for the sake of keeping the peace. Because when you come from nothing like I did, you learn early in life to bend without breaking. You develop an almost supernatural ability to absorb unfairness and keep moving forward, because the alternative standing up for yourself and potentially losing everything you've worked for feels too risky to contemplate. But Margaret could smell this shift in our dynamic like a shark detecting blood in the water. She recognized that Victoria was becoming more willing to choose the path of least resistance, and she started pressing her advantage harder and more frequently. She began insisting on more events, more family gatherings, more opportunities to undermine me in front of others who mattered to Victoria. Her favorite weapon was the art of weaponized concern, where she would twist her obvious disapproval into compliments that felt like knife wounds. "I'm just saying, darling," she would tell Victoria within my earshot, because subtlety was for people who actually felt shame about their cruelty. You could have married someone so much more polished, someone who really understands your world. And here's the worst part of the whole situation. Victoria didn't always push back against these attacks anymore. It wasn't because she had stopped loving me or because she agreed with her mother's assessment of my worth. It was because she was simply tired. Tired of the constant tug-of-war between her mother and her husband. Tired of having to choose sides over and over again. Tired of defending our relationship against someone who would never accept it no matter what we did. I understood her exhaustion, I really did. The constant conflict was wearing on both of us, and I could see how it was draining Victoria's energy and enthusiasm for everything else in her life. But here's what I learned about relationships during that difficult period. The moment you stop actively defending what you've built together, that's precisely when the foundation starts to rot from the inside out. And Margaret, with her decades of experience in psychological warfare, saw that rot as validation of everything she had believed about me from the very beginning. She saw Victoria's fatigue as proof that I was exactly the burden she had always claimed I would become. She once told Victoria, making sure I was within earshot because she wanted me to hear every word, "He may love you, sweetheart, but does he really belong in your life? Does he fit into the world you were meant to inhabit?" That was the question that began to haunt everything we did together. Not whether I was good enough for Victoria as a person, we both knew I loved her completely and would do anything for her happiness. The question that poisoned our relationship was whether I fit into her world, a world of manicured hedges and monogrammed towels and people who judged your character by the cut of your collar before they even bothered to ask your name. So when that chair wasn't waiting for me at Celestine that evening, it wasn't really a shock or a surprise. It was the culmination, the grand finale of a long, carefully orchestrated game that I didn't even realize I'd been playing from the very start. Margaret had been building toward this moment for months, maybe even years, setting the stage for my ultimate humiliation in front of the entire family. But here's the truth that Margaret never understood, and that I finally realized as I sat in that private chef's table with Lorenzo's note in my hands. I didn't fall in love with Victoria to win a seat at her mother's table. I fell in love with her heart, not her house. I fell in love with the woman who challenged me in that library, who made me laugh until my sides hurt, who believed in my dreams when they were still just sketches on napkins. And that night, when I turned away from Margaret's perfectly orchestrated smirk and walked toward the life I had built on my own terms, I remembered something crucial that I had somehow forgotten during all those months of trying to earn her approval. I never needed her permission to begin with. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from smiling too long at people who are secretly hoping you'll fail. For the longest time, I used to think that success would eventually silence them, that if I just worked hard enough, booked the right clients, built the right reputation, and married the right woman, they would finally stop looking at me like I was a tourist who had somehow wandered into their exclusive world without proper documentation. But I was completely wrong about that. People like Margaret Sterling don't get silenced by your success. They just find new and more creative ways to belittle you. They evolve their condescension, like a virus adapting to antibiotics. If they can't ignore your achievements anymore, they simply find fresh angles of attack to diminish them. With Margaret, her weapon of choice was always the dinner table, and she wielded it with the precision of a master swordsman. It started so subtly that I almost missed it, like seasoning that you don't notice until there's too much of it. One missed invitation here, a text message sent deliberately after the RSVP deadline there, a mysteriously forgotten +1 for events that couples were obviously expected to attend together. "So sorry, David," she would say, with that perfectly practiced sympathetic pout that always seemed to have a laugh hidden somewhere behind it. It must have completely slipped my mind. You know how these things are with all the planning and coordination involved. At first, I genuinely gave her the benefit of the doubt. Mistakes happen to everyone, right? People get busy, details fall through the cracks, and social event planning can be genuinely complicated when you're coordinating multiple families and schedules. But then came the name cards. And that's when I knew for certain that her mistakes were anything but accidental. I'll never forget the engagement party for Victoria's cousin. One of those elaborate celebrations where every detail had been planned months in advance and cost more than most people spend on their actual weddings. Every place card at that engagement party was written in elegant, flowing script, the kind of calligraphy that costs a fortune and takes weeks to complete properly. Each name was perfectly centered on thick cardstock, positioned with mathematical precision at each place setting. Every single card was perfect except for one, mine. Mine read Daniel Chen in that same beautiful script. Not David, Daniel. I was seated right next to the catering table, positioned perfectly between the swinging kitchen door and the melting ice sculpture of two doves frozen mid-kiss. It was the kind of seating arrangement that ensured I would be bumped into by every server carrying trays, splashed by every trip they made to refill the ice, and constantly interrupted by the chaos of event logistics. Victoria squeezed my hand under the table when she saw the name card, her face flushing with embarrassment and anger. She whispered a quiet apology in my ear and promised me with genuine conviction that this kind of thing wouldn't happen again. She seemed truly mortified by her mother's behavior, but it did happen again, and again, and again. Each time with some new creative twist that proved Margaret's imagination for petty cruelty was truly limitless. Margaret had perfected the art of making insults feel like proper etiquette. She never outright said that I was unworthy of being there. That would have been uncouth and obvious beneath someone of her supposed refinement. Instead, she preferred her cuts to be wrapped in compliments, delivered with such skillful precision that you couldn't quite prove malicious intent even when it was glaringly obvious. "You clean up so nicely, David," she said one evening as I helped pour wine for her dinner guests, running her eyes over my carefully chosen outfit like she was appraising livestock. "For a consultant, I mean." The pause before those last three words was perfectly timed for maximum impact. Or there was the time she asked, with that innocent smile that fooled absolutely no one. Oh, you do branding work? Like business cards and flyers? As if the sophisticated restaurant campaigns I had developed were somehow equivalent to making photocopied advertisements for yard sales. One evening that still burns in my memory, I brought a bottle of vintage wine that I had been gifted by a client. Something I was genuinely proud to share because it represented a successful project and a meaningful professional relationship. Margaret turned the bottle slowly in her manicured hands like she was evaluating the weight of a bowling trophy, examining the label with the kind of theatrical scrutiny usually reserved for fine art authentication. Then she delivered the killing blow with that same sweet smile. "Oh, how charming and thoughtful of you, David. I didn't know this particular label made it out of grocery stores these days." I could have called her out on any of these moments. I should have. The old David from East Tampa, the one who had learned to fight for respect in environments where it was never freely given, would have pushed back immediately and decisively. But I didn't. And here's why. The moment you start fighting back at those kinds of dinner parties, you instantly confirm exactly what people like Margaret are accusing you of. You prove that you don't know how to behave in polite society, that you're too emotional and reactive to belong in their refined world, that you lack the sophistication to handle their subtle social dynamics with appropriate grace. Nothing would have thrilled Margaret more than watching me lose my composure and trip over my own wounded pride in the middle of her perfectly polished parquet floors in front of all her carefully curated guests. So I played it cool instead, maintaining my composure with the kind of discipline that comes from years of swallowing your pride. I smiled politely at her thinly veiled insults, ate her consistently undercooked lamb without complaint, and let her guests pretend I wasn't even there when it suited their conversations. But each time one of these incidents occurred, I took careful note of what happened. I wasn't cataloging these slights out of pettiness or a desire for revenge. I was tracking them with the precision of a sommelier who carefully notes the tannins and undertones of different vintages. Because here's what people like Margaret don't understand. They think dinners are harmless social gatherings, just pleasant evenings among friends and family. But the dinner table is actually where real power lives and breathes. Margaret held court at those tables with her sterling silver cutlery and pristine white linen like a queen presiding over her subjects, daring the peasants to spill something or use the wrong fork. Every seating arrangement was a political statement. Every conversation topic was a test, and every invitation or exclusion was a message about your place in her carefully constructed hierarchy. But this dinner at Celestine wasn't just another one of her casual jabs or routine humiliations. This was her masterpiece, her grand orchestration of complete erasure. This was Margaret's attempt to definitively establish that I simply didn't belong in her world, period. I should have seen it coming from miles away. 2 weeks before the dinner, Victoria had mentioned that her mother was planning something special for the Sterling family anniversary, one of those milestone celebrations that wealthy families use to reinforce their legacy and importance. "It's just going to be family," Victoria had told me, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant she was trying to manage a delicate situation. I wasn't originally invited, but Mom insisted that we both come. She specifically said she wants to keep things peaceful and inclusive this time. That phrase should have been my first and loudest warning bell. Margaret Sterling never wanted peace, and she was never inclusive unless it served some larger strategic purpose. She wanted optics, the appearance of family harmony that would look good in photos and social media posts, and I was always the blemish on her carefully curated canvas, the element that didn't quite fit the aesthetic she was trying to project. Still, against my better judgment, I agreed to attend. I told myself it would be fine, that we could show up. I could sit through another evening of practicing my well-rehearsed grace under pressure, and then we could go home to our real life, the life that existed outside the suffocating atmosphere of her mother's vanity and social warfare. But I had no idea just how far Margaret was planning to go this time. I didn't realize that she wasn't just planning another subtle slight or passive-aggressive comment. This wasn't going to be a carefully worded insult disguised as concern or a mistaken name card. This was going to be execution by placement, a complete and total exclusion that would humiliate me in front of the entire extended family. Every seat at that table would be filled. Every fork would be lifted in unison. Every glass would be raised in celebration. And no one, absolutely no one, would think to make room for the man who wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. The worst part of that entire evening wasn't the empty space where my chair should have been, and it wasn't even Margaret's perfectly delivered fake apologies. The worst part was the choreography of it all. The way every single cousin, every in-law, every family friend acted like this was completely normal and expected. Like I should have somehow known to stand there awkwardly while the entire family settled in for their celebration. While the waitstaff hovered nearby, clearly unsure whether they should offer me a drink or politely escort me away from the table, every member of Victoria's extended family played their part in this orchestrated humiliation with Oscar-worthy performances. They sat in their assigned seats, unfolded their napkins, and began chatting about safe topics like the weather and recent vacations, all while pretending that the man standing beside their table simply didn't exist. Victoria said nothing during those crucial first moments. Her mouth opened and closed, like she was trying to find words, but no sound came out. Her hand gripped her designer purse like it was the only thing anchoring her to the floor, and her eyes darted between me and her mother with the panicked expression of someone watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. And Margaret? She delivered her killing line with the kind of Oscar-worthy subtlety that only comes from decades of practice in refined cruelty. Maybe a budget place would suit you better, David. There was no malice in her tone. At least, none that could be proven in court. Just pure, powdered cruelty that had been refined and aged like her favorite vintage burgundy. Her words were delivered with the kind of casual precision that made them feel like a simple observation rather than a calculated attack. But something fundamental shifted inside me in that moment. I wasn't angry, not exactly. Anger would have been too simple, too predictable. What I felt was something much deeper and colder than anger. It was a crystalline realization that I was completely done playing by the rules of a dinner table that had never been set for me in the first place. The humiliation that Margaret had so carefully planned didn't land the way she had hoped it would. It didn't crush my spirit or send me slinking away in shame. Because somewhere between all those misnamed place cards and half-hearted apologies, somewhere between all those accidental exclusions and weaponized dinner invitations, I had stopped caring about being liked by people who saw basic human kindness as a sign of weakness. I didn't flinch when she delivered her line. I didn't plead for inclusion or try to explain why I deserved to be there. I didn't launch into a defensive speech about my accomplishments or my love for Victoria. Instead, I laughed, and it surprised even me. That laugh came out light and effortless, bubbling up from somewhere deep in my chest. I wasn't laughing at a joke or trying to deflect tension with humor. I was laughing at the pure absurdity of the entire situation, that this woman actually thought this moment would somehow define me or break my spirit. That she believed her approval was still something I desperately needed or wanted. That she had no idea, didn't even suspect, what I had quietly built in the shadows of their luxury while she was busy planning my social destruction. She had chosen Celestine specifically because it represented everything she valued most: status, exclusivity, and the kind of refined power that money could buy and flaunt. But what Margaret didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known, was that 8 months earlier, this same restaurant had been circling the drain, hemorrhaging money and facing imminent closure. And I had been the one to pull it back from the brink of bankruptcy, not publicly, not with any fanfare or recognition, but through careful strategy, refined taste, deep understanding of restaurant psychology, and a comprehensive vision that Margaret could never recognize or appreciate. Because she fundamentally didn't understand that real influence doesn't announce itself with loud proclamations and dramatic gestures. Real influence whispers. It works quietly behind the scenes, building something meaningful and lasting rather than demanding immediate recognition. That's exactly why the night at Celestine didn't break me or crush my spirit the way Margaret had hoped it would. Because it was never supposed to be my battlefield in the first place. It was my blueprint, my creation, my professional masterpiece that she was unknowingly using as a weapon against me. Margaret thought she was cleverly using the restaurant to bury me under a mountain of shame and social humiliation. But all she had actually done was walk confidently into a building that I had helped brand, resurrect from near death, and position to become the most sought-after culinary experience in the entire city. The irony was absolutely exquisite, like a perfectly paired wine that enhanced every note of the meal. And the best part of all? She didn't even know it yet. She had no idea that her carefully chosen venue for my public destruction was actually a testament to my professional capabilities and vision. Margaret thought she was closing a door on me, slamming it shut with decisive finality. But in reality, she had just confidently walked into the house that I had helped design and build from the ground up. So when I smiled at that table and turned away from her orchestrated humiliation, when I walked past the Sterling family table like it was nothing more than background noise in a busy restaurant, I wasn't seeking refuge or desperately trying to salvage what remained of my wounded dignity. I was stepping into something that had always been mine by right, something I had earned through hard work and creative vision rather than inheritance or social connections. I was walking toward recognition that I had built with my own hands rather than begged for from people who would never see my worth. Because here's the truth that Margaret Sterling never understood. Death by 1,000 dinner parties only works if you're still desperately hungry for a seat at their table. And me? I had learned something crucial during all those months of exclusion and humiliation. I had learned to bring my own table. Let me tell you about how Celestine was never supposed to become mine, at least not on paper, and certainly not in the whispered conversations of Margaret Sterling's social universe. But when Lorenzo Martinez called me that night 8 months ago, his voice tight with barely controlled desperation and his considerable ego hanging by a thread, I knew immediately that I was being invited into something far more valuable than a simple consulting paycheck. I was being asked to revive a sinking ship that had been wrapped in the finest velvet and marketed as unsinkable luxury. This was supposed to be a fine dining institution with decades of prestigious history. But underneath all the elegant decor and expensive marketing, it had a foundation that was slowly rotting away from neglect and mismanagement. My phone buzzed again as I sat in that private chef's table, the soft vibration cutting through my memories. This time it was a text message from Victoria. "Everything okay?" I stared at the simple question on my screen for a long moment, but I didn't respond right away. The answer was more complicated than a quick text could convey, and I needed time to process everything that had just happened and what it meant for our relationship going forward. Instead of typing back immediately, I lifted my chin and turned toward the grand staircase that led back to the elevators and the main entrance of the restaurant. My footsteps echoed softly in the cavernous lobby as I walked with a newfound sense of serenity and purpose that I hadn't felt in months. Gone completely was the panic and shame that had clawed at me just moments before when I stood beside that table full of people who couldn't be bothered to make room for me. In its place, a calm certainty had settled across my shoulders like a perfectly tailored coat that fit exactly as it should. As I walked, I thought about the flash drive hidden in my bag, the backup copy of Client Connect Pro that had miraculously survived deletion, containing months of work and innovation that had been written off as worthless. I thought about Carmen's encouraging words and her promise of true professional autonomy in an environment that would value creativity over politics. When I reached the elevator bank, I pressed the call button and paused before the polished steel doors. I allowed myself one final look back at Vail Consulting's towering corporate facade, its mirrored windows gleaming with the kind of corporate pride that values image over substance. Somewhere high up in that building, Harrison was still seated behind his imposing mahogany desk, surrounded by the trophies and accolades of his 50-year career. He was completely convinced that he held all the power in our professional relationship, that he could delete my work and dismiss my contributions without any meaningful consequences. But Harrison didn't know that real power had quietly slipped through his fingers like sand. He didn't understand that influence and respect can't be commanded through intimidation. They have to be earned through trust and mutual appreciation. The elevator arrived with a soft, musical ping, its doors parting like a curtain to reveal the steel-lined interior that would carry me away from this confrontation and toward whatever came next. As I stepped inside and felt the familiar sensation of being lifted away from the ground floor, I thought about the conversation that was still to come. I pictured myself delivering a calm, measured counteroffer to Harrison, presenting the Apex Dynamics contract with quiet confidence rather than desperation. I imagined his face when he realized that his attempt to crush my spirit had actually freed me to pursue something far better than anything Vail Consulting could offer. I felt the weight of the future shifting beneath my feet, like tectonic plates adjusting to accommodate new landscape. The tilt of possibility was beckoning me forward toward opportunities I had never dared to imagine when I was still trying to earn approval from people who saw my creativity as a threat rather than an asset. A fine dining institution with a rotting foundation that was hemorrhaging both money and reputation at an alarming rate. My cell phone buzzed again as I sat there in that private chef's alcove, pulling me momentarily back to the present moment. This time, it was a text message from Victoria that simply read, "Everything okay?" I stared at those 3 words on my screen for a long moment, but I didn't respond immediately. The question was far more complicated than it appeared on the surface, and the answer would require more explanation than any text message could possibly contain. Not yet, anyway. Instead of typing back right away, I lifted my chin and turned my attention toward the grand staircase that led back to the main dining room, and eventually to the elevators. My footsteps echoed softly against the polished floors as I walked with a newfound serenity that I hadn't felt in months, maybe even years. The panic and shame that had clawed at my chest just moments earlier, when I stood awkwardly beside that table full of people who couldn't be bothered to acknowledge my existence, had completely evaporated. In its place, a calm certainty had settled across my shoulders like a perfectly tailored coat that fit exactly the way it was supposed to. As I walked through the restaurant's elegant corridors, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. I thought about the months of careful work I had put into transforming Celestine from a failing establishment into the crown jewel of the city's dining scene. I thought about Lorenzo's desperate phone call 8 months ago, and how his pride had been hanging by the thinnest of threads when he finally admitted he needed help. I thought about all the late nights spent redesigning their brand identity, all the strategic meetings about menu positioning and customer experience, all the careful cultivation of relationships with food critics and social media influencers who could make or break a restaurant's reputation with a single review. I thought about how Margaret Sterling had unknowingly chosen the perfect venue for what she intended to be my professional and social execution. She had picked Celestine because it represented everything she valued: exclusivity, sophistication, and the kind of understated power that money could buy and display. But what she didn't realize, what she couldn't have possibly known, was that in choosing this restaurant as the stage for my humiliation, she had actually walked into a building that bore my fingerprints on every aspect of its success. From the carefully curated lighting that made every dish photographed beautifully, to the precise timing of service that made guests feel pampered without feeling rushed, to the social media strategy that had turned Celestine into the kind of place where reservations were booked months in advance. I had helped create the very atmosphere of exclusivity and desirability that Margaret was now using as a weapon against me. The irony was so perfect it almost felt like poetry. When I reached the elevator bank, I pressed the call button and allowed myself one final look back toward the main dining room where the Sterling family was undoubtedly still seated around their carefully arranged table. Margaret was probably still basking in what she believed was her victory, completely unaware that her chosen battlefield was actually my professional masterpiece. The elevator arrived with a soft, musical chime, its polished doors sliding open to reveal the gleaming interior that would carry me away from this entire scene. As I stepped inside and felt the familiar sensation of being lifted away from the chaos below, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine peace with my own choices. I thought about the conversation that was waiting for me when I got home, the calm explanation I would give to Victoria about what had just happened and what it meant for our future together. I thought about how I would tell her that I wasn't angry with her for not defending me. I understood her impossible position between her mother and her husband, but I also knew that I was done playing by the rules of a game where the deck was permanently stacked against me. I was finished trying to earn approval from people who would never see my worth no matter what I accomplished. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor and those doors slid open again, I knew exactly how I felt about everything that had just transpired. I wasn't bitter or vengeful. I wasn't plotting some elaborate revenge against Margaret or her family. I was simply free. Free from the exhausting cycle of trying to prove myself to people who had already decided I wasn't worth their respect. Free from the constant anxiety of wondering whether I would be included or excluded from the next family gathering. Free from the soul-crushing weight of caring what Margaret Sterling thought about my life, my career, or my relationship with her daughter. As I walked through the restaurant's elegant lobby and out into the warm evening air, I realized that Margaret had actually done me a tremendous favor. Her carefully orchestrated humiliation had shown me something crucial that I might never have understood otherwise, that I had been seeking validation from people whose approval was never worth having in the first place. The night air felt different as I stepped outside, cleaner, lighter, full of possibilities I hadn't noticed before. I pulled out my phone and finally responded to Victoria's text. "Everything is perfect," I typed back. "I'll explain when I get home." And for the first time in months, I truly meant it. Everything was perfect because I had finally stopped trying to fit into a world that was never designed to include me. I had remembered something important that I had somehow forgotten during all those dinner parties and social gatherings. I didn't need Margaret Sterling's world. I had built my own. Looking back now, I can see that the dinner at Celestine wasn't the end of my story with the Sterling family. It was actually the beginning of my real life. The life where I stopped apologizing for who I was and started celebrating what I had accomplished. Margaret thought she was closing a door on me that night, but what she actually did was show me that I had never needed that door to be open in the first place. Because while she was busy planning my social execution, I had been quietly building something much more valuable than her approval. A career, a reputation, and a sense of self-worth that couldn't be deleted with a single cruel comment or erased by an empty chair at someone else's table. And the most beautiful part of all, she still had no idea that the restaurant where she had chosen to humiliate me was actually a monument to everything I was capable of achieving when people got out of my way and let me work. I sat at my desk in the hushed atmosphere of late afternoon light. The Apex Dynamics contract spread before me like a detailed map, leading to an entirely new world of professional possibilities. My fingers hovered over the signature line, trembling slightly from the weight of what I was about to do and the magnitude of the decision I was making. Vail Consulting had been my professional home for years. It was the place where I had experienced both my greatest triumph and my deepest humiliation. The company had given me opportunities to grow and develop my skills, but it had also become a suffocating environment that felt more like a gilded cage built on my father-in-law's rigid notions of power and control. But now, sitting there with that contract in front of me, it felt like I was finally ready to break free from those constraints. The memory of Harrison's scornful declaration that my work was garbage still echoed in my mind, along with the metallic sound of that delete button being clicked with such casual dismissiveness. In that moment of destruction, when everything I had worked for seemed to disappear with a single mouse click, I had actually found my freedom. Now, I was finally ready to claim it fully and without reservation. I drew in a long, steadying breath, recalling every detail of Harrison's expression when he had delivered his crushing verdict in that sterile boardroom. I remembered the way he had looked at months of my careful work and innovation, as if it were nothing more than an annoying obstacle to be cleared away. And then I remembered the satisfying moment when I realized that his arrogance had actually protected my work from complete destruction. Because while he had deleted the main files in a fit of executive rage, he had never thought to ask whether backup copies existed elsewhere. I dipped my pen into the ink and signed my name with deliberate, measured strokes. Each letter felt like a proclamation of independence, a declaration that I was finally choosing myself over the comfortable familiarity of a toxic work environment. I was leaving Vail Consulting. I was walking away from the politics, the power games, and the soul-crushing hierarchy that had made every day feel like a battle for basic professional respect. I rose slowly from my chair, feeling the significance of the moment settling into my bones. I folded the signed contract with careful precision and placed it in its envelope, treating it with the reverence it deserved as my ticket to a better future. Beside the contract lay the flash drive, the only surviving copy of Client Connect Pro, carefully wrapped in a thin strip of protective tape. I felt a surge of deep satisfaction at the thought that Harrison's massive ego and his rush to demonstrate his power had actually ensured that my most important work would survive his attempt to destroy it. He had thrown away my innovation on a whim, treating months of development like it was disposable garbage. But I had been smart enough to protect my work from his impulsive decision-making, and now that foresight was about to pay off in ways he could never have imagined. I collected all the materials carefully and tucked them securely into my briefcase, handling each document with the respect it deserved. I leaned back in my chair for a moment, allowing myself to glance around the office that had been my professional home for so many years, taking in all the familiar details one last time. The taste of anticipation mixed with traces of regret moved through me like competing flavors in a complex wine. There was genuine regret for the relationships I was about to leave behind. Regret for the years of my life I had invested in building something at this company, and regret for the missed opportunities that had led us all to this breaking point. But regret was a luxury I simply couldn't afford anymore. Real change demanded real sacrifice, and I had finally reached the point where staying would cost me more than leaving ever could. I made my way down the familiar corridor toward the imposing boardroom that loomed ahead like a shrine dedicated to corporate ritual and power games. I unlocked the heavy door quietly and stepped inside, immediately feeling the weight of 10 pairs of eyes turning toward me in unified surprise. Around the polished conference table sat the usual collection of executives in their perfectly tailored suits, analysts clutching their ever-present notepads and laptops, and my wife Nina, who looked as if the floor had suddenly fallen out from under her feet. Her face was pale with shock, and I could see the confusion and concern written clearly in her expression. Harrison sat at the head of the table in his customary position of authority, his arms crossed over his chest, and his expression completely inscrutable. His sharp eyes flicked quickly from my briefcase to my face and back again, and I could see the corners of his mouth twitching with the kind of curiosity that comes from recognizing a disruption to carefully maintained control. I could practically feel the hunger radiating from him, that familiar thrill he got from wielding power over others, especially when that power was threatened or challenged in any way. I closed the door firmly behind me and moved to stand at the center of the room, feeling every eye in the place converging on me like beams of intense spotlight. The silence was thick and expectant, broken only by the soft rustle of fabric against leather as people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. "I'll be leaving Vail Consulting," I announced, keeping my voice firm and steady despite the slight tremor I could feel building in my throat. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Soft gasps erupted around the table like popcorn kernels hitting hot oil. Two analysts exchanged wide-eyed glances that communicated more than words ever could. One executive pushed back his chair so hard it almost toppled over, and Nina bit down on her lower lip so hard I could see the tremor running through her entire jaw. Harrison's posture shifted immediately. He uncrossed his arms and leaned forward aggressively, his eyebrows raised in a mixture of irritation and genuine disbelief, as though I had just violated some sacred and unwritten code of corporate decorum that everyone was supposed to understand instinctively. "You're walking out in the middle of a meeting?" he asked, his tone carrying equal parts irritation and incredulity. His voice suggested that my timing was not just inappropriate, but personally offensive to him. "No," I replied, stepping closer to him so that my words would carry their full weight and impact. "I'm walking out of the shadow you cast over everything I do here." I placed the Apex Dynamics contract on the polished conference table directly in front of him, the crisp envelope making a sharp snapping sound as it hit the wood. The sound seemed to echo in the tense silence of the room. "This is my next chapter," I said with quiet conviction. Harrison's gaze hardened immediately as he picked up the envelope, his fingers inspecting the thick, expensive paper and the embossed corporate seal with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for legal documents. I watched him closely, never blinking, as I saw the gravity of my decision slowly register in his expression. Then I reached into my briefcase and withdrew the flash drive, holding it up so that everyone in the room could see it clearly. The tiny device caught the light from the overhead fixtures, glinting like a small but precious jewel. "And this," I said, lowering my voice but keeping it unwavering and strong, "is a backup of the project you deleted." A collective murmur rippled through the assembled group like a wave. Isla from the design team pressed her fingertips to her lips in shock. Trevor from accounts glanced quickly at Simone, who whispered something completely inaudible under her breath. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from professional tension to something much more personal and dramatic. I met Harrison's eyes directly and saw something fundamental shift in his expression. A flicker of uncertainty, and perhaps the first stirring of genuine regret. It was subtle, but it was there, and seeing it gave me a surge of satisfaction that I hadn't expected. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears as Nina rose slowly from her chair. Her eyes were glistening with unshed tears that threatened to spill over at any moment. She stepped forward tentatively, her voice trembling with a mixture of desperation and love. "Ryan, you don't have to do this," she said, reaching out toward me with one hand. "We can work through whatever this is. We can find a solution that works for everyone." She reached for my arm and I felt the familiar warmth of her touch, the comfort that had sustained me through so many difficult moments in our marriage. For just a moment, I allowed myself to see the life we might have continued together if I stayed. The evenings in our company-sponsored apartment, the celebrations for every corporate milestone, the comfortable routine of Harrison's conditional approval lingering over everything we did. But then I remembered how he had systematically stifled every creative vision I had brought forward. I remembered how he had consistently equated innovation with insubordination, treating my best ideas like personal attacks on his authority. I remembered the contempt in his voice when he called my work garbage, and the casual cruelty with which he had deleted months of careful development. I shook my head gently, squeezing Nina's hand affectionately before releasing it with finality. "No," I said softly, staring directly into her eyes so she would understand that this decision came from love, not anger. My voice cracked slightly with the weight of sorrow and resolve. "I have to do this. I can't be bound by someone else's ego anymore. Not anymore." I turned away from Nina and headed directly for the door without giving anyone else in that room another glance. Behind me, I could hear the shuffle of chairs scraping against the floor, the sharp intake of breath from startled executives, and Harrison's low, controlled exhale that spoke volumes about his mixture of anger and disbelief. I paused at the threshold of the boardroom, my hand resting on the door handle, and looked back one final time at the assembled group. The tableau of stunned faces seemed frozen in time, like a photograph capturing the exact moment when everything changed. A snapshot of the instant I severed my professional ties and reclaimed my sense of purpose. The heavy door closed behind me with an almost reverent finality, the soft click echoing down the hallway like a period at the end of a very long sentence. In the corridor outside, the familiar hum of office conversation and keyboard clicking seemed to swallow me up. But the echo of my dramatic departure followed me like an omen of changes to come. I walked toward the elevator bank with my shoulders squared and my head held high, feeling each step become lighter than the last. With every stride I took away from that boardroom, I felt more of the weight lifting from my shoulders. The weight of trying to please people who would never be satisfied. The weight of suppressing my creativity to fit someone else's narrow vision. I felt a powerful surge of exhilaration wash over me as I realized something profound. Today, I hadn't destroyed anything at all. I had built a bridge to my own future, constructed from my own determination and the courage to refuse compromise when it came to my professional integrity. Vale Consulting would continue without me, probably barely missing a beat in their relentless pursuit of quarterly profits and corporate efficiency. But my path lay elsewhere now, stretching out ahead of me like an open road full of possibilities I had never dared to imagine when I was still trapped in Harrison's sphere of influence. As the elevator doors slid shut with their familiar mechanical precision, I carried with me not just a signed contract and a precious flash drive containing my life's work. I carried something far more valuable, the unshakable knowledge that when you finally refuse to live in someone else's shadow, when you stop seeking approval from people who will never respect your contributions, you set yourself free in ways that transform everything about how you see yourself and your capabilities. The elevator began its smooth ascent, carrying me away from the boardroom confrontation and toward whatever future I was brave enough to build for myself. I felt lighter with each passing floor, as if I was physically rising above the toxic environment that had held me back for so long. Walking into Apex Dynamics for the first time felt like stepping through a portal into the future I had been chasing for years without even realizing it. The lobby was a vibrant, energizing clash of exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that let natural sunlight pour in like a warm invitation to be part of something genuinely innovative. Instead of the hushed corridors and suffocating hierarchy that had defined Vale Consulting, Apex Dynamics featured an open-plan workspace where people naturally clustered around high tables, trading ideas with the same enthusiasm and energy that baristas brought to crafting the perfect latte at the prominent espresso station. I had never felt more alive in a professional environment, or more certain that I had made exactly the right choice in leaving my old life behind. My new manager, Carmen Reyes, greeted me with a firm handshake and a genuine grin that seemed to light up every pixel on her bright orange blazer. There was an immediate warmth and authenticity about her that I hadn't experienced in a professional setting for years. Behind her, a large wall-mounted digital display rotated smoothly through Apex Dynamics' core values: innovation, empathy, ownership. It occurred to me as I read those words that these weren't just empty buzzwords that had been slapped onto laminated posters by some corporate marketing team. These were living, breathing principles that actually guided every interaction and decision in this workplace, from the way people spoke to each other to the way they approached complex problems. Carmen led me on a comprehensive tour through the dynamic workspace, introducing me to colleagues who stopped mid-sentence with surprise and genuine excitement when I explained that I had built Client Connect Pro completely from scratch. Everyone's eyes lit up immediately when they heard those 3 words, Client Connect Pro. No one scoffed dismissively at the concept of personalized birthday cards for clients. No one rolled their eyes at the idea of AI-driven empathy tracking or questioned whether such features had any real business value. Quite the opposite, actually. They wanted to know more. They leaned in with genuine curiosity, asked thoughtful questions about the technical implementation, and shared ideas about how the system could be expanded and improved. That afternoon, I had the opportunity to sit in on a high-level brainstorming session with Apex Dynamics' entire leadership team. The meeting was led by CEO Youssef Kane, who immediately struck me as a warm, approachable presence despite wearing a sharp-cut suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He had distinguished silver at his temples, but his eyes danced with an infectious combination of mischief and deep intelligence that made every conversation feel engaging. "Ryan, welcome to the team," he said enthusiastically, clasping my hand with both of his in a gesture that felt genuine rather than performative. "We've been waiting for someone exactly like you to join us." I felt a ripple of genuine pride at the beautiful simplicity of that welcome. There were no caveats attached to his greeting, no subtle reminders of my place in some rigid corporate pecking order, and no unspoken conditions that I would need to meet before being fully accepted. I wasn't being treated like a number on a spreadsheet or a replaceable cog in some massive corporate machine. I was being welcomed as the reason clients stayed loyal, the innovator who understood that business relationships were fundamentally human relationships that required care and attention to flourish. Within my first week at Apex Dynamics, I dove headlong into the work with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in years. The fundamental bones of Client Connect Pro had survived the deletion incident completely intact. But now I finally had the resources, support, and creative freedom to flesh out the system fully according to my original vision. I commandeered a glass-walled conference room that became my temporary headquarters and drew our ambitious new roadmap across every available whiteboard surface. The expanded system would include deeper AI sentiment analysis driven by sophisticated natural language processing, an integrated CRM plugin suite that could work seamlessly with existing business systems, mobile notifications that were fine-tuned to each client's specific time zone and communication preferences, and a learning algorithm that could adapt outreach strategies based on cultural nuances and individual client personalities. My mind raced with possibilities that I had never been allowed to explore at Vail Consulting. We could create automated anniversary videos that felt personal and meaningful, proactive wellness check-ins that showed genuine care for client relationships, and even holiday outreach that was carefully tailored to honor every client's cultural heritage and personal celebrations. Here at Apex Dynamics, the Sync Squad was reborn on a much grander scale than I'd ever imagined possible. By the middle of my first week, I had successfully assembled a cross-disciplinary task force that brought together the best minds from different departments across the company. There was Layla Cruz, whose design sensibilities perfectly balanced brand consistency with emotional resonance, creating interfaces that were both beautiful and deeply functional. Trevor Winslow joined us as the account manager who spoke fluent client voice. He had an almost supernatural ability to translate technical features into benefits that customers could immediately understand and appreciate. And then there was Anton, a brilliant data scientist with a rare talent for turning raw server logs and user behavior data into compelling narratives that revealed exactly how our system was impacting real business relationships. Together, our team worked late into Thursday night, the soft glow of laptop screens reflecting our collective obsession with building something truly groundbreaking. The energy in that conference room was electric. Everyone was fully invested in the project, contributing ideas and expertise without any of the territorial politics or ego battles that had made teamwork so difficult at Vail Consulting. At 2 a.m., when the last dedicated barista finally locked up the coffee bar and headed home for the night, We paused to lean back in our chairs and marvel at the incredible functionality we had built in just a few intense days of collaboration. We had created an AI-generated mood meter that visualized client sentiment in an intuitive heat map, making it immediately obvious which relationships needed attention and which ones were thriving. There were module buttons for custom video greetings that could be personalized based on client preferences and interaction history. Most impressively, we had developed a sophisticated algorithm that could suggest surprise thank you gifts based on detailed analysis of each client's purchase history, social media activity, and stated interests. Friday morning arrived on the wings of caffeine and barely contained excitement. We launched our internal beta version of the enhanced system, and within just a few hours, 3 different department heads had already scheduled comprehensive demos to see what we had built. When Layla presented the fresh, intuitive interface to the first group of executives, one of them actually exclaimed with genuine enthusiasm, "This is exactly what we needed. This is going to change how we think about client relationships entirely." Trevor handled the follow-up calls with potential pilot clients, carefully noting their genuine delight as he walked them through the system's capabilities. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Clients were excited about the possibility of more personalized, thoughtful interactions with their service providers. Anton fielded the inevitable technical questions about integrating our new system with legacy platforms and existing business infrastructure. His expertise and clear communication style made even the most complex technical challenges seem manageable and straightforward. That afternoon, I returned to my desk to find 3 major contracts waiting for my review and signature. Each one represented a significant client requesting an expedited rollout schedule for Client Connect Pro. These weren't small pilot programs or cautious trial runs. These were full-scale implementations that would generate substantial revenue and prove the system's value in real-world business environments. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. In just 5 intense days of focused work, we had successfully transformed a rough prototype that had been dismissed as garbage into a polished product that clients were literally queuing up to adopt and implement in their own operations. Meanwhile, word was traveling fast through the professional networks and industry connections that make up the consulting world. I received an email that afternoon from a Vail Consulting liaison, just one terse line with no greeting or pleasantries, which told me everything I needed to know about their current state of desperation. They had heard through the grapevine about Client Connect Pro's dramatic revival and remarkable success at Apex Dynamics, and they were now begging for an emergency licensing meeting. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. The same firm that had wiped my months of work from their servers with a single dismissive click was now scrambling desperately to salvage their rapidly deteriorating business relationships. I forwarded their pathetic request directly to Carmen with a single line of response: "Your move." By Monday morning, my phone was practically vibrating off my desk with an endless stream of notifications. Meeting invites flooded my calendar, Slack channels pinged constantly with new messages and collaboration requests, and urgent alerts reminded me of all the opportunities that were suddenly opening up around me. Apex Dynamics was calling me a visionary, a game changer, an essential part of their future growth strategy. The title of son-in-law that had followed me around like a shadow at Vail Consulting no longer lurked behind every professional interaction. Instead, I was being introduced and recognized as Ryan, our chief strategy architect, a title that represented my actual contributions rather than my family connections. The words felt strange on my tongue at first, like trying on clothes that were too good to be true. But the truth of that recognition settled warmly in my gut, confirming what I'd always known about my capabilities when given the proper environment to thrive. That afternoon, I received a text message from Nina that made my stomach tighten with familiar tension. She had heard about Vail Consulting's desperate outreach attempt and was clearly torn between loyalty to her father and recognition of what he had done to me. "They're asking for the system back," she wrote, her words carrying the weight of family pressure and corporate politics. "Dad wants to license it from Apex Dynamics. He says he's sorry and wants to make things right." My thumb hovered over my phone screen as I considered how to respond. Part of me ached at the prospect of reconciliation, the possibility of healing the professional and personal wounds that had been opened by Harrison's destructive behavior. The idea of returning to some version of our previous relationship was tempting, offering the comfort of familiar routines and family connections. But I knew better than to fall for Harrison's shallow expression of regret. His apology was nothing more than a business calculation, a desperate attempt to coerce me back into the same suffocating dynamic that had nearly destroyed my creativity and professional confidence. He wasn't sorry for treating my work like garbage. He was sorry that his decision had cost him a valuable asset. Harrison's regret was entirely self-serving. He didn't want to make amends because he had suddenly developed respect for my innovations or recognized my worth as a professional. He wanted Client Connect Pro back because he had realized that losing it was costing him clients and revenue. I typed a single word in reply to Nina's message: blocked. Then I watched the phone interface confirm that I had silenced that contact forever, cutting off any future attempts at manipulation or guilt-laden appeals to family loyalty. The finality of that action felt liberating rather than cruel. It was a clear boundary that protected my newfound professional independence. As the sun began to set over the city, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, I shut down my laptop and stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Tampa skyline. The lights of the city flickered in the distance like scattered stars, each one representing dreams and ambitions and people working toward their own versions of success. But here at Apex Dynamics, in this vibrant workspace filled with genuine collaboration and mutual respect, we had captured something special. Our own constellation of innovation and achievement that shone brighter than anything I had experienced in my previous professional life. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a moment to fully savor the freedom I was feeling. It was the liberating absence of doubt, the thrilling sensation of building something meaningful without arbitrary constraints or ego-driven interference. It was the profound satisfaction that comes from working with people who believe in giving credit where it's genuinely due. Tomorrow would inevitably bring new challenges, fresh client demands, and unexplored horizons that would test our abilities and push us to grow even further. But tonight, sitting in this moment of quiet triumph, I felt completely whole and aligned with my professional purpose. I stepped away from the window, my shoulders relaxed, and my pulse steady with contentment. Every time I looked at the elegant Apex Dynamics emblem on my desk, a symbol that represented innovation, empathy, and ownership, I was reminded of how fragile respect can be when it's handed out like a discount or a favor. But I had also learned how genuinely transformative respect becomes when it's earned through merit and shared freely among colleagues who value each other's contributions. The contrast between my old environment and my new one couldn't have been more stark or more affirming. As I walked out of the office that evening, my keys in hand and my briefcase containing the contracts that would shape our company's future, I knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning of what I would be able to build when nobody stood in my way or questioned my vision. The morning my inbox filled with cancellation notices from Vail Consulting's clients, I realized that the true power of Client Connect Pro extended far beyond the boundaries of our innovative code or sophisticated algorithms. It was living proof that when you build something people genuinely love and find valuable, they will come to you even without a single outreach call or marketing campaign. I swiveled casually in my chair at Apex Dynamics' bustling open-plan workspace, watching the email notifications pop up on my screen one after another, like a steady drumbeat echoing through the professional consulting world. Tria Alderman has canceled her renewal with Vail Consulting, read the first message. Arctis Foundation will not be continuing their consulting contract, announced the second. Peterson Group is terminating their engagement effective immediately, declared the third. Each message arrived with the satisfying rhythm of vindication, rattling the very foundations of Vail Consulting's legacy and proving that Harrison's dismissive attitude toward innovation had consequences he never anticipated. These weren't just business transactions, they were votes of confidence in a better way of managing client relationships. I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction as I processed what was happening, then forwarded the growing collection of cancellations to Carmen with a brief but meaningful note. They came to me. By mid-morning, the buzz of celebration throughout our open workspace was electric and contagious. The energy was tempered only by our collective realization that these corporate departures signaled seismic shifts happening throughout the consulting world, changes that went far beyond our individual success. Account managers gathered around my desk with broad grins and eager expressions, ready to swap stories about the unprecedented response we were receiving. Layla Cruz practically bounced over to give me an enthusiastic hug as she passed by, murmuring with genuine amazement, "I've never seen anything like this in my entire career." Trevor Winslow approached and shook my hand with such vigor that I thought he might actually break my fingers. His excitement barely contained. Their enthusiasm was genuinely contagious, and it affirmed something I had suspected but never dared to voice. Client Connect Pro wasn't just another software product or business tool. It was the foundation of a movement, a fundamental shift in how companies could approach client relationships with authenticity and genuine care rather than cold efficiency and transactional thinking. Across town, I could easily imagine Harrison Vale sitting behind his imposing walnut desk, surrounded by the mahogany shelves lined with trophies and awards from his 50-year career. I pictured the knot of anger and disbelief that must be twisting in his chest as he scrolled through the same cancellation notices that were now populating my morning inbox. In Harrison's rigidly structured world, efficiency reigned supreme over everything else. His business philosophy dictated that logic should determine loyalty, and he had built his entire career on the assumption that clients would cling to Vale Consulting out of habit, inertia, and fear of change rather than genuine satisfaction with their service. He was about to learn a harsh lesson that had apparently escaped him during his decades in business. When the companies you supposedly serve fall in love with someone else's vision and approach, loyalty becomes entirely optional. Relationships built on convenience and tradition crumble quickly when clients discover something that actually meets their needs. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed with the familiar tension-inducing notification of a text message from Nina. The brief message carried the weight of family pressure and corporate desperation. "Dad's asking if you'll license the system back to him." I stared at those words on my screen, feeling the old, familiar tug of family duty and obligation tightening around my heart like a rope. I could almost hear Harrison's voice behind Nina's message, probably saying something like, "Tell him he should be grateful to have an inside connection. This is his chance to give us another opportunity." I could picture him clearly in his glass-walled corner office, clinging desperately to the remnants of control, like a drowning man grasping at driftwood. His pride, which had once seemed so formidable and unshakable, was now the very force that was propelling the client exodus he was desperately trying to stem. But I had learned something absolutely vital during these transformative past weeks at Apex Dynamics. True respect isn't something you beg for or negotiate for like a business contract. It's something you earn through consistent excellence and protect through clear boundaries. It's something that has to be freely given, not extracted through guilt or family obligation. I drafted my reply to Nina carefully, weighing each word for its impact and finality. "Tell him no." I tapped send and then immediately locked my phone, resisting the strong temptation to engage any further with what I knew would be an escalating series of appeals, arguments, and attempts at emotional manipulation. There was something genuinely liberating about that simple, decisive action. Drawing such a clear boundary between my past disappointments and my current success felt like building a protective wall around everything I had worked so hard to achieve. Licensing Client Connect Pro back to Vale Consulting would have felt exactly like handing a life raft to the same person who had tried to drown me professionally. It would have been a betrayal of my own principles and the trust that my new colleagues had placed in me. I pushed away from my desk and stood up, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from hours spent coding, strategizing, and building something meaningful. I walked over to the sleek kitchenette area, poured myself a glass of cold water, and gazed out through the panoramic windows at the sprawling Tampa skyline. In the distance, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting a warm, golden sheen over the entire city. It was a beautiful reminder that every ending carried within it the promise of a new dawn. Every closed door opened up space for better opportunities. Back at my workstation, I opened our team's Slack channels and immediately saw them bursting with celebration, strategic planning, and excited energy about our next steps. The path forward was becoming crystal clear to all of us. Our immediate priority was to capitalize on Vale Consulting's strategic missteps by offering seamless migration packages to their departing clients. We needed to make the transition as smooth and attractive as possible for companies that were ready to embrace a more innovative approach to client relationship management. I quickly drafted a comprehensive roadmap for what we were calling our Welcome Aboard campaign. The plan included personalized video messages from our leadership team, live onboarding sessions that would walk new clients through every feature, and an immersive VR tour of Apex Dynamics' state-of-the-art innovation lab that would showcase our commitment to cutting-edge solutions. The entire team immediately chimed in with insights, suggestions, and refinements to the timeline. Our collective energy crackled through the digital workspace like electricity, creating an atmosphere that felt both purposeful and unstoppable. That evening, I slipped out of the office to meet Carmen and Youssef for dinner at a quiet waterfront restaurant that overlooked the bay. Over perfectly grilled fish and chilled coconut water, they raised their glasses in a heartfelt toast to our remarkable success. The conversation was warm with genuine admiration and mutual respect, a stark contrast to the tense, competitive dinners I had endured during my time at Vail Consulting. Youssef leaned forward across the candlelit table, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the flickering flames. "You've proven something that I've always believed, but rarely seen demonstrated so clearly," he said with conviction. "Innovation thrives when people are trusted to lead their own projects and make their own decisions." I sipped my coconut water slowly, feeling waves of gratitude and renewed determination swirling together inside me like complementary flavors in a perfectly crafted cocktail. I knew there would undoubtedly be tougher days ahead of us, new competitors emerging from unexpected directions, unforeseen technical hurdles that would test our problem-solving abilities, and the constant pressure that comes with successfully scaling any innovative business. But tonight was specifically about acknowledging and celebrating how far we had already come as a team. It was about recognizing the remarkable transformation from a dismissed prototype to a sought-after solution that was reshaping industry standards. As we stood to leave the restaurant, I glanced back one final time at our table, where empty plates and glasses caught the soft, romantic glow of the waterfront lanterns. Carmen slipped me a handwritten note as we gathered our things, a simple gesture that felt incredibly meaningful after years of sterile corporate communication. "Thank you for believing in us," the note read in her distinctive handwriting. I carefully pocketed the note, savoring the beautiful simplicity of the gesture. It was such a stark contrast to the sterile emails, curt dismissals, and passive-aggressive memos that had characterized my communication at Vail Consulting. Here was genuine human connection and appreciation expressed in the most authentic way possible. Stepping out into the warm night air, I felt the ocean breeze lifting the hem of my jacket as I inhaled deeply. Each breath tasted of opportunity, fresh starts, and the kind of possibilities that only become visible when you finally step away from environments that constrain your potential. Walking home along the scenic waterfront promenade, I found myself reflecting on the beautiful irony of that morning's cancellation notices. To most business observers, losing clients would naturally feel like a devastating defeat, a sign that something had gone terribly wrong with customer relationships or service quality. To me, however, those cancellations represented something entirely different. They were a clarion call, a clear signal that clients were actively seeking something more meaningful than the efficient but soulless service they had been receiving. They were searching for relationships rather than transactions, for systems that honored their humanity rather than treating them like data points in a spreadsheet. Client Connect Pro had given them exactly what they were looking for, and in doing so, it had completely upended the very firm that had tried so desperately to crush its development. The system had proven that business relationships could be both profitable and genuinely caring, both data-driven and emotionally intelligent. At home, I found Nina waiting for me on our apartment balcony, the sparkling city lights reflected in her thoughtful eyes. She offered me a tentative smile, as though she was carefully testing whether our relationship could successfully adapt to this dramatic new reality we found ourselves navigating. I moved to stand beside her, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders, and pointed out over the glittering water where the lights of the city danced like scattered diamonds on the dark surface. "They came to me," I said softly, echoing the day's most important refrain, the phrase that captured everything about this transformation. She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the city lights met the star-filled sky. "You deserve this success," she whispered with genuine conviction. "You've earned every bit of it." In that moment, standing on the balcony with the warm evening breeze around us, I realized how far I had journeyed from the man who once desperately sought validation through a CEO's approval and conditional acceptance. I had traveled an incredible distance, both professionally and personally, from someone who needed permission to prove his value to to someone who had built his own foundation of respect and recognition. Respect was no longer a privilege that I chased or begged for from people who would never truly appreciate my contributions. It had become the solid foundation upon which I was building my entire life and business philosophy. It was something I gave freely to others and expected in return, not as a favor, but as a basic requirement for any meaningful professional relationship. As the night settled peacefully around us, I felt a quiet but unshakable certainty that the new standard I had established here at Apex Dynamics would ripple outward far beyond our company's walls. It would redefine what it meant to be a leader who actually led rather than simply commanded. It would change expectations about what it meant to be a colleague who collaborated rather than competed. And it would transform the very definition of what it meant to be a true champion of innovation in an industry that desperately needed fresh thinking. 8 weeks had passed since I first walked into Apex Dynamics' sleek, modern offices, carrying nothing but a signed contract and an ambitious dream. In that relatively short time, the world I knew had been irrevocably transformed in ways I never could have imagined when I was still trapped in Harrison's suffocating sphere of influence. I sat at the head of our glass-walled conference room as the morning sun filtered through the adjustable blinds, casting long, slanted stripes of golden light across the polished table. Around me, the entire team buzzed with barely contained energy as we pored over the latest performance numbers and client acquisition statistics. The figures were almost surreal in their magnitude. Apex Dynamics had successfully absorbed 40% of Vail Consulting's client base. 40%. The number felt like something from a business school case study rather than our actual reality. It was a testament to our collective conviction that respect and innovation, when properly combined and executed, could completely outmatch entrenched complacency and rigid thinking. We had proven that clients would choose authentic relationships over familiar routines when given a genuine alternative. I traced the margin of my notebook where I had absent-mindedly doodled the phrase "new standard" weeks ago during one of our early strategy sessions. Looking at those words now, I realized we had not only met, but dramatically exceeded even my boldest initial expectations for what we might accomplish together. The door to our conference room slid open smoothly, and Isla Cruz stepped inside with her leather portfolio tucked confidently under one arm and a triumphant smile lighting up her entire face. Trevor Winslow followed closely behind her, adjusting his tie with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years successfully navigating high-stakes boardroom presentations. I stood to greet them both, feeling a surge of genuine pride at their presence in our meeting. These were two of Vail Consulting's most talented and respected account managers, and now they were here at my side, part of our growing team of innovators and relationship builders. Isla crossed to the whiteboard and tapped confidently on a colorful chart that displayed our remarkable client acquisition timeline over the past 2 months. 8 weeks ago, she said, her voice tinged with amazement and disbelief, we were the underdogs in this industry. Everyone expected us to fail or struggle for years to gain traction. Now look at what we've accomplished together. I nodded in acknowledgement, recalling with perfect clarity her first hesitant email to me weeks ago. In that message, she had confessed that she was reaching out because she was completely tired of watching genuinely good ideas get systematically crushed under Harrison's rigid doctrine of risk aversion and control. She had risked her entire career for a chance to build something that actually mattered, something that would make a real difference in how businesses approached client relationships. Trevor stepped forward confidently, sliding a crisp sheet of paper onto the polished conference table. I've compiled comprehensive feedback from all of our newly acquired accounts, he announced, his voice thick with excitement and professional satisfaction. They're not just happy with our service, he continued, his enthusiasm building with each word. They're evangelical about it. They're actively referring us to their business partners and industry contacts. Competitors are whispering about us at conferences and trade shows. And 3 more mid-tier consulting firms are ready to negotiate partnership agreements as we speak. The words rang out through the quiet conference room like sustained applause, filling the space with the energy of genuine accomplishment. I leaned back in my chair, feeling my shoulders relax for the first time in weeks as the magnitude of our success settled over me like a comfortable blanket. This wasn't just about impressive numbers on a quarterly report or revenue projections that would look good in a board presentation. This was about building a genuine movement, a fundamental paradigm shift where empathy and analytics could dance together in perfect harmony instead of fighting for dominance in every business decision. Between the impressive statistics and the spontaneous celebrations happening around our workspace, I found myself wondering about Harrison's current state of mind. I could easily imagine him sitting in his executive suite at Vail Consulting, positioned behind that imposing walnut desk that had intimidated so many employees over the years. I pictured the carefully arranged fields of mahogany shelves behind him, lined with the trophies and awards from his 50-year career, symbols of a business philosophy that was rapidly becoming obsolete. I could almost see the knot of anger and disbelief twisting in his chest as he stared at the dwindling renewal reports that told the story of his company's decline. In his rigid, controlled world, efficiency had always reigned supreme over every other consideration. His management philosophy dictated that logic should determine loyalty, and he had built his entire professional reputation on the assumption that clients would cling to Vail Consulting out of habit, inertia, and fear of change, rather than genuine satisfaction with innovative solutions. His pride, which had once seemed so formidable and unshakable, was now the very force that was propelling the client exodus he was desperately trying to understand and reverse. He was doubling down on the same spreadsheet-driven tactics and cost-cutting measures that had created the problem in the first place, while clients continued to slip through his fingers like sand. I felt no personal triumph in imagining his pain and confusion, no sense of vindictive satisfaction at his professional struggles. What I felt instead was the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing that his refusal to embrace nuance and innovation had set the stage for a new era in consulting. An era where both relationships and results mattered equally. As our team debrief session wound down, I excused myself and returned to my private office, a smaller but more comfortable space furnished with a single desk and a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf filled with industry publications and strategic planning materials. I poured myself a cup of rich, aromatic coffee from the high-end espresso machine, listening to its steady hiss as it worked its caffeinated magic. The familiar sound was reassuring and grounding, a small ritual that helped me process the magnitude of what we had accomplished. My eyes drifted naturally to the framed flash drive that sat prominently on my bookshelf, the original backup copy of Client Connect Pro that had survived Harrison's attempt at digital destruction. It stood there like a silent monument, a powerful reminder of where this incredible journey had begun and how far we had traveled since that devastating moment in the boardroom. I swirled the coffee slowly in my ceramic mug, savoring its warmth and complexity, and considered the winding path that had brought me to this moment of professional triumph. The boardroom deletion that could have ended my career, the desperate call from Apex Dynamics that offered a lifeline, the clandestine reconstruction of my life's work. And now this moment of vindication that exceeded my wildest expectations. Each milestone along the way had taught me something crucial about the nature of innovation and leadership. I had learned that true innovation required not just creative vision, but also the courage to stand firmly by that vision when others sought to dismantle or dismiss it. I had discovered that respect was not something you could demand or negotiate for, but something you earned through consistent excellence and protected through clear boundaries. Layla's words from earlier in our meeting echoed in my mind with perfect clarity. We were tired of watching good ideas get crushed under rigid thinking. I realized in that moment that this exhaustion extended far beyond the walls of Vail Consulting or even our specific industry. Across every sector of business and innovation, bright concepts and creative solutions were languishing in the shadows of risk-averse leadership. Promising ideas were being buried beneath the crushing weight of tradition, bureaucracy, and the kind of thinking that prioritized short-term safety over long-term growth and adaptation. Here at Apex Dynamics, we had managed to crack open that stifling tradition and fling its doors wide for creativity, collaboration, and genuine compassion. We had created an environment where innovation wasn't just tolerated, but actively celebrated and nurtured. I set my coffee mug down on the desk and tapped a few quick commands on my laptop, composing a company-wide memo to celebrate our remarkable 80-day milestone. In the email, I made a conscious decision to write not about percentages, profit margins, or quarterly projections, but about the people behind those impressive numbers. I wrote about the account managers who had believed in our vision when it seemed impossible. I described the clients who had embraced significant change in their business operations because they trusted our approach. I highlighted the colleagues who had transformed a rough prototype into a lifeline for Fortune 500 companies seeking more meaningful relationships with their service providers. That afternoon, a video call request appeared on my computer screen that made my pulse quicken with familiar tension. The caller ID showed Harrison Vale in stark black letters. I paused before clicking either accept or decline, feeling the familiar churn of adrenaline that accompanied any interaction with my former boss. Part of me was genuinely curious to see if he had softened at all, whether his recent professional setbacks had finally given way to some form of humility or genuine reflection on his management approach. But I knew better than to expect any real change in his fundamental character or business philosophy. Harrison's version of respect had always been conditional, tied to deference and submission rather than merit or mutual recognition. His apologies, when they came, were typically strategic rather than sincere. I declined the call without hesitation, sending a brief but definitive reply. No further discussion necessary. As I hit send on that final message, I felt a profound lightness settle over me like a weight being lifted from my shoulders. It was the kind of clarity that comes from refusing to revisit old wounds and choosing instead to focus entirely on the future we were building together. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath of the clean office air, and turned my attention back to the innovative work that lay ahead of us. There was so much more to accomplish, so many more opportunities to explore, and so many more ways to elevate the industry standard for client relationship management. That evening, I joined my team for our weekly innovation hour, a cherished tradition at Apex Dynamics where anyone in the company could pitch wild ideas, experimental concepts, or blue sky thinking without fear of judgment or immediate rejection. It was exactly the kind of creative environment that Harrison had never been able to understand or appreciate. The energy in the room was electric and infectious. I watched with genuine fascination as a junior developer enthusiastically demonstrated a prototype for a virtual reality onboarding experience that would allow new clients to take immersive tours of our facilities and meet team members in a completely digital environment. Another talented teammate proposed an ambitious deep learning model that could predict client needs and preferences before they were even consciously expressed by the clients themselves. The algorithm would analyze communication patterns, response times, interaction preferences, and historical data to anticipate what each relationship needed to thrive. Laughter and passionate debate filled the room as ideas zipped between desks like fireflies at dusk, each concept building on the previous one in an organic symphony of collaboration and creativity. I found myself raising my coffee cup in a silent toast to all of them. The dreamers, the doers, the believers who had chosen to join us in this mission. In their passion and dedication, I saw the living embodiment of the new standard we had established at Apex Dynamics. This was a culture where innovation wasn't just a buzzword printed on motivational posters, but the very air we breathed every single day. It was an environment where creativity was nurtured rather than suppressed, where bold thinking was rewarded rather than punished. As the evening's brainstorming session wound down and people began to pack up their laptops and notebooks, I realized something profound. In building Apex Dynamics into what it had become, I had not only honored the true potential of Client Connect Pro and vindicated my own professional capabilities, I had also sparked a revolution in respect and creativity that would echo long after any quarterly reports or performance metrics were forgotten. We had created something that transcended individual success or company profits. We had established a new way of thinking about innovation, collaboration, and human dignity in the workplace. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just as I was settling into my routine of reviewing strategic dashboards and sipping my first cup of coffee. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number that I recognized as the area code for Vale Consulting headquarters. A familiar chill ran through me as I answered, wondering what desperate measure they might be attempting now. "Ryan," came the tight, controlled voice of Gideon Marshall, Vale Consulting's chief operating officer. His tone carried the unmistakable stress of a man delivering a message he would rather not have to convey. "Harrison wants to speak to you urgently," he continued without any pleasantries or small talk. "He's asked me to set up a meeting to discuss a potential partnership arrangement, or possibly even selling the firm to you outright. Are you interested in buying Vale Consulting or taking over leadership of the company?" I felt the weight of Gideon's question settle into my chest like a heavy anchor, and for a moment, I was genuinely speechless. After 8 weeks of watching Vail Consulting hemorrhage clients to Apex Dynamics like a sinking ship taking on water, I could almost hear Harrison's considerable pride finally cracking under the pressure of undeniable reality. He was offering me the keys to the kingdom he had once denied me access to, a final, desperate gambit to salvage whatever remained of his professional legacy. It was the ultimate irony. The man who had dismissed my work as garbage was now begging me to save his entire company from the consequences of his own rigid thinking. My heart pounded steadily as I considered the magnitude of what Gideon was proposing. I could buy the firm outright, reshape it according to my vision, and finally have the opportunity to implement all the innovative ideas that Harrison had systematically rejected over the years. I could lead the company, bend it to my creative will, and prove once and for all that my approach to client relationships was superior to their outdated methods. But even as I entertained these possibilities, I knew what my answer had to be. Taking over Vail Consulting would mean tethering myself once more to the man who had deleted months of my careful work with casual dismissiveness. It would mean accepting a role that positioned me as Harrison's reluctant savior, forever indebted to someone who had tried to break my spirit and crush my professional confidence. "Thank you for reaching out, Gideon," I said after a long moment, keeping my voice steady and professional despite the emotional weight of the decision. "Please tell Harrison that I genuinely appreciate the offer and understand the significance of what he's proposing." I paused, choosing my next words carefully to ensure they carried the appropriate finality. "But I'm not interested in buying or leading Vail Consulting," I continued with quiet conviction. "My future lies here at Apex Dynamics, where innovation is valued and creativity is nurtured rather than suppressed." I ended the call before Gideon could respond with counteroffers or attempts at negotiation, letting the line go silent in my ear. I placed the phone deliberately on my desk and leaned back in my chair, releasing a long, satisfying exhale that seemed to carry away the last remnants of my connection to that toxic environment. The irony of the situation was absolutely delicious, and I allowed myself to savor it fully. The very firm that had dismissed me and my innovations as worthless garbage was now desperately begging for a lifeline from the innovator they had spurned. But I refused to be drawn back into their orbit of dysfunction and control. I would not be their reluctant savior, forever indebted to the man who had tried to destroy my confidence and creativity. I had built something better, something more authentic, and something that honored the principles Harrison had never understood. Across town in his expansive corner office, I could easily imagine Harrison's face contorting with disbelief and mounting frustration as Gideon delivered my rejection. His legacy, painstakingly built over decades of deals and boardroom victories, was crumbling around him like a house built on an unstable foundation. Now he was scrambling desperately for any kind of partnership with the very innovator he had dismissed and humiliated. The man who had never been able to see beyond his precious spreadsheets and quarterly projections was finally learning that those same spreadsheets now told a story of retreat, defeat, and irrelevance. I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile, not out of malice or vindictiveness, but as an acknowledgement that his own inflexibility had brought him to this moment of professional vulnerability. He had never learned to see past his rigid control systems, and now those systems were collapsing under the weight of a changing industry that demanded innovation and authentic relationships. Back at Apex Dynamics, when I shared the news of Harrison's desperate offer with my team, the entire workspace erupted into spontaneous applause and celebration. The sound echoed through our open-plan office like a thunderclap of vindication and collective triumph. Isla practically launched herself across the room to give me an enthusiastic high five that nearly knocked me off balance. Trevor clapped me on the back with such force that I thought he might leave bruises, his grin stretching from ear to ear. Carmen Reyes wrapped me in a warm hug, her eyes shining with genuine pride and satisfaction. "You did it," she said with conviction, her voice carrying the weight of everything we had accomplished together. "You didn't even have to consider it for a second." I shook my head, smiling broadly at the energy and excitement radiating from everyone around me. "I'm building something here," I replied, gesturing around at the vibrant workspace that had become our shared creative sanctuary. "I'm not interested in rescuing ghosts from the past. Their applause felt genuine and well-earned. Concrete proof that real leadership meant guiding others forward into new possibilities rather than clinging desperately to outdated systems and failing approaches. It was validation that innovation and respect could create something far more valuable than corporate tradition and hierarchical control. The remainder of that day buzzed with forward momentum and strategic planning. I convened an emergency strategy meeting to discuss our ambitious expansion plans, and we spent hours mapping out new territories and industry sectors where Client Connect Pro could disrupt other stagnant incumbents who were still relying on outdated relationship management approaches. We talked excitedly about potential partnerships with cutting-edge fintech startups that were revolutionizing how businesses handled financial relationships. We explored possible integrations into healthcare CRM platforms that could transform how medical providers maintained connections with their patients. We even discussed pilot programs in emerging international markets where relationship-based business practices were becoming increasingly valued. Each new idea felt fueled by the stark contrast between the suffocating atmosphere we had escaped at Vail Consulting and the boundless horizons that stretched out before us at Apex Dynamics. Every brainstorming session reinforced our shared belief that we were part of something much larger than a simple business success story. I realized during those planning sessions that my refusal of Harrison's offer wasn't just a rejection of his desperate proposal. It was a declaration of independence that went far deeper than any business transaction. It was a statement that my worth and my future were not determined by his approval or disapproval, but by the value I created and the relationships I built on my own terms. That evening, I was invited to speak on a virtual industry panel about emerging trends in client engagement and relationship management. The moderator introduced me with genuine enthusiasm as the architect behind Apex Dynamics' meteoric rise and the innovative mind reshaping how businesses think about client relationships. As I shared insights about the powerful convergence of artificial intelligence and human-centered design, I felt a thrill at the thought that Vail Consulting might be tuning in to this very panel. I could imagine Harrison and his remaining team desperately trying to glean whatever wisdom they could from the approaches they had once dismissed as impractical or unnecessary. During the panel discussion, other participants asked thoughtful questions about overcoming organizational resistance to innovation and cultural change. I spoke candidly about my own experience with rigid corporate hierarchies, sharing how one executive's deletion of my work had taught me the critical importance of stewarding innovation and finding partners who truly believed in forward-thinking vision. I concluded my remarks with a statement that felt both personal and universal. Never delete what you don't understand. You might be erasing the very thing that holds your company's future together. After the panel concluded and I had answered the final questions from industry colleagues around the world, I returned to my desk to find an email waiting for me from Gideon Marshall. The message was brief and formal, containing just a single line that spoke volumes about Harrison's current state of desperation. He wrote simply, "Harrison regrets how things ended between you and hopes to maintain a cordial relationship moving forward." I stared at that sentence for a long moment, feeling the familiar weight of family expectations and corporate politics trying to reassert themselves in my life. Harrison's regrets were shallow and self-serving, I knew. His sudden desire for cordiality had nothing to do with genuine remorse for how he had treated me and everything to do with his desperate need to salvage whatever remained of his crumbling business empire. Without hesitation, I deleted the message without reading any further or crafting a response. I didn't need Harrison's regrets or his hollow attempts at reconciliation. What I needed, what I had already found, was the trust and respect of the team that was building the future alongside me, brick by brick and innovation by innovation. Later that night, I walked home beneath a sky strewn with brilliant stars, the city's lights flickering around me like distant embers scattered across a vast canvas. I found myself reflecting on the winding path that had led me from the nephew-in-law desperately chasing validation to the scrappy innovator who had refused to back down when faced with institutional resistance. I thought about my transformation from someone who needed external approval to survive professionally to someone who had become a leader forging entirely new standards in the consulting industry. Each step of that journey had been necessary. Each setback had taught me something valuable, and each victory had built the foundation for the next challenge. I thought about Nina, who had chosen clarity over conflict when our values and priorities had inevitably diverged. There was no bitterness between us after our quiet separation 6 months following my departure from Vail Consulting. We had both recognized that our fundamental approaches to life and career had grown incompatible, and we had parted ways with mutual respect rather than acrimony. In choosing to prioritize my authentic self over family expectations and social pressure, I had also chosen a path that honored my deepest values and professional integrity. The decision had been painful but necessary, and I had never once regretted the courage it took to walk away from a comfortable but ultimately unfulfilling situation. At my apartment, I paused at the large window that overlooked the glittering city skyline, taking in the tapestry of lights and endless possibilities that stretched out before me. I felt deeply grounded by the knowledge that my worth was no longer measured by anyone else's approval or disapproval, but by the tangible impact I was creating in the world through my work and relationships. Vail Consulting would inevitably become a cautionary tale that I would share often at conferences and in boardrooms around the world. It would serve as a parable about the dangers of hubris and missed opportunities, a story about what happens when rigid thinking meets rapid innovation and loses decisively. Their downfall would become a teaching moment about the importance of nurturing creativity rather than suppressing it, about the value of listening to new ideas, even when they challenge established practices, and about the catastrophic cost of dismissing innovation simply because it doesn't fit existing paradigms. Meanwhile, Apex Dynamics would continue to grow and evolve, guided by a culture that honored each person's unique contribution and potential. We would remain committed to an environment where no idea would ever be deleted without careful consideration and thoughtful evaluation, where creativity was celebrated rather than feared. I turned away from the window and switched off the lights in my apartment, feeling ready to rest before another day of innovation and possibility lay ahead. The echo of that fateful deletion click might still linger somewhere in the depths of my memory, but it no longer held any power over my present or future. Instead, that deletion click now served as a powerful reminder, a touchstone that taught me something crucial about resilience and opportunity. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs emerge precisely when someone else tries to erase your contributions and dismiss your vision. In that moment of attempted erasure, you discover the freedom to build your own legacy on your own terms. Every morning, I begin my day with the same meaningful ritual that has become my anchor in this fast-paced world of innovation and constant change. I start with a strong cup of perfectly brewed coffee, followed by a contemplative glance at the Tampa skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Apex Dynamics' Global Strategy Suite, and then a moment to breathe in the quiet hum of possibility that fills our workspace. It's a ritual born of necessity, a daily practice that grounds me in gratitude and purpose. It serves as an anchor in a world that moves at the breakneck speed of technological innovation and industry transformation. Yet, no matter how many times I repeat this morning routine, I never fail to feel the sting of contrast between this sunlit, creative space and the darkened boardroom where Harrison Vail once struck that decisive delete key on everything I had built. That echo of a single mouse click still reverberates in my mind like both a taunt and a triumph, a sound I carry with me every time I carefully press save on a new project or innovation. It reminds me how fragile progress can be when it depends on the approval of people who don't understand its value. Since that boardroom exile that could have ended my career, Apex Dynamics has grown beyond even my most optimistic predictions and ambitious projections. We now lead client engagement strategies for dozens of Fortune 500 companies, each relationship carefully nurtured by the very ethos that Vail Consulting could never embrace or understand. Treating respect as a living practice rather than a line item on a quarterly report. My days are filled with dynamic strategy sessions and collaborative innovation workshops, punctuated by moments of quiet reflection when I remember how fragile and precious progress truly is. I remind myself constantly that every line of code I write, every personalized outreach sequence I design, every relationship-building algorithm I develop may one day face its own deletion attempt from someone who doesn't understand its purpose or potential. That's exactly why I guard our company culture so fiercely and protectively. Innovation without protection and nurturing is like a fragile candle flame in a hurricane wind. It can be extinguished by a single careless gesture or moment of institutional short-sightedness. This morning, as I step into our main conference room for our weekly global team stand-up meeting, a respectful hush falls over the assembled group. There's an unspoken recognition among my colleagues that I've become more than just a department leader or project manager. I've evolved into a symbol of what's possible when creativity is valued over conformity and when innovation is protected rather than suppressed. Youssef Kane stands confidently at the head of our polished conference table, his presence commanding but warm. There's a subtle nod of acknowledgement from him that communicates something profound. This creative space, this innovative environment, this culture of mutual respect is ours to shape and protect together. He smiles genuinely when our eyes meet across the room, and I catch a glimpse of our reflection in the sleek black glass wall behind him. I see the man who once needed explicit permission to prove his professional value, now guiding a movement that's built on autonomy, shared purpose, and the unwavering belief that good ideas deserve to be nurtured rather than deleted. Across the conference table, Layla Cruz clicks smoothly through a new series of sophisticated mock-ups for our latest AI-driven empathy dashboard. Her designs flow like living data streams, each interface element carefully crafted to translate complex client sentiment into intuitive visual narratives. Cool blues dominate the sections where client satisfaction is running high and relationships are thriving. Warm oranges appear in areas where our system has detected potential issues that require personal attention and proactive outreach. Her color-coded approach transforms abstract emotional data into something immediately actionable and deeply human. She explains with infectious enthusiasm how the new interface will allow account managers to anticipate client needs before a single phone call is made or email sent. The system will learn from patterns of communication, response times, and engagement levels to predict when relationships need nurturing and what type of intervention will be most effective. I nod approvingly as I listen, my mind drifting back to the early days when Client Connect Pro was nothing more than rudimentary sentiment flags scribbled on legal pads during late-night brainstorming sessions. The memory of those initial flowcharts and midnight coding sprints still fuels my deep appreciation for every incremental improvement we celebrate today. The evolution from those primitive beginnings to this sophisticated emotional intelligence platform represents thousands of hours of collaborative work, countless iterations and refinements, and an unwavering commitment to the belief that technology should enhance rather than replace human empathy in business relationships. After Layla concludes her presentation, Trevor Winslow takes center stage to present an exciting partnership proposal with a leading healthcare provider. The organization is interested in embedding our relationship management system within their patient outreach platforms, creating a seamless integration between medical care and ongoing relationship building. His excitement is genuinely infectious as he describes how proactive check-ins and personalized follow-up communications can dramatically improve patient outcomes while simultaneously strengthening the bonds between healthcare providers and the communities they serve. This represents exactly the kind of expansion we had envisioned when we first began developing Client Connect Pro, moving beyond traditional business relationships to touch every aspect of human connection and care. I find myself recalling the pivotal conversation I had in Harrison's sterile office when I first advocated passionately for blending sophisticated analytics with genuine human empathy. He had dismissed the entire concept as fluff, unnecessary complexity that distracted from the cold efficiency he valued above all else. Now, industries that once scoffed at the idea of personalized relationship management are clamoring desperately for the very magic that Harrison had denigrated and deleted. Healthcare providers, financial institutions, educational organizations, and even government agencies are recognizing that sustainable success requires authentic human connections supported by intelligent technology. It's a quiet vindication that I savor in the private chambers of my heart, even as I consciously choose gratitude and forward momentum over triumphalism and dwelling on past slights. The satisfaction isn't about being proven right. It's about seeing ideas that were once considered impractical now transforming entire industries. Later in the afternoon, I retreat to my private office to prepare for an upcoming keynote address at an international consulting summit. The invitation arrived several weeks ago as a direct result of our rapid ascendance in the field and our reputation for innovative approaches to client relationship management. I plan to share the cautionary tale of Vail Consulting's downfall alongside the inspiring story of Apex Dynamics' rise, creating a narrative that illustrates how one leader's inability to understand nuance and embrace change led directly to his firm's unraveling, while another organization's commitment to innovation created opportunities that were tenfold greater than any deletion could ever destroy. I want the summit attendees to walk away with more than just impressive data points and statistical analysis. I want them to feel the profound weight of possibility that comes with truly understanding innovation, and to understand the tremendous responsibility that innovation demands from leaders who are entrusted with nurturing new ideas. As I draft my keynote speech, carefully choosing each word for maximum impact, my phone buzzes with an unexpected message from Nina. 6 months have passed since our quiet separation, a mutual decision that allowed both of us to pursue paths that better aligned with our individual values and life goals. Yet her words still carry the warmth of shared history and genuine care. "Hope you're well," she writes in her characteristically simple and direct style. There's no subtext hidden in her message, no plea for reconciliation or attempt to reopen closed chapters. It's just a fleeting moment of connection between two people who once tried to build a life together under the shadow of someone else's expectations and limitations. I consider my response carefully, typing back a single word that captures everything about my current state. Thriving. I pause for a moment, thinking about whether I should elaborate or share more details about the remarkable journey I've been on since leaving Vail Consulting. I could tell her about the success we've achieved, the innovations we've implemented, or the industry recognition that has followed our work. But I decide that some bridges are meant to carry us forward rather than bind us to the past. There's beauty in letting certain connections remain simple and uncomplicated, honoring what they were without trying to transform them into something they were never meant to become. I hit send and set the phone aside, watching as the screen dims into standby mode. The brief exchange feels complete and appropriate, a gentle acknowledgement of our shared history without any attempt to resurrect what we both chose to leave behind. Later that evening, my keynote presentation begins to take its final shape. I craft an opening anecdote about the delete click that defined the trajectory of my entire career, using it as a powerful metaphor for how organizations often destroy their own potential through short-sighted decision-making and resistance to change. I follow this personal story with a detailed analysis of how empathy-driven design can not only coexist with hard ROI metrics, but actually enhance them in measurable ways. I weave in compelling case studies from Apex Dynamics' recent victories, highlighting specific examples of how our approach has transformed client relationships and generated substantial business value. The presentation includes concrete data about our voluntary client migrations, companies that chose to leave established relationships with traditional consulting firms to work with us instead. These defections serve as the ultimate endorsement of our philosophy, proving that when clients are given a genuine alternative, they will choose authentic relationship building over transactional efficiency. I plan to conclude the keynote with a powerful call to action that extends far beyond our specific industry. I want to challenge leaders across all sectors to never delete what they don't fully understand, to nurture ideas with both analytical precision and emotional intelligence, and to remember that respect, once earned through consistent excellence, can become the unshakable bedrock of enduring success. The message I hope to convey is both practical and philosophical. Innovation requires courage, patience, and the wisdom to recognize potential, even when it doesn't fit existing frameworks or challenge conventional approaches. Before the day draws to a close, I make 2 critical decisions that will shape Apex Dynamics' future culture and values. First, I decide to formalize a comprehensive mentorship program within our organization, ensuring that our culture of empowerment and creative thinking filters through every level of the company hierarchy. This program will pair experienced innovators with emerging leaders, creating pathways for knowledge transfer, and ensuring that our commitment to nurturing new ideas becomes institutionalized rather than dependent on individual personalities or management styles. Second, I decide to commission a commemorative plaque for our main lobby that will serve as a permanent reminder of the principles that guide our work. It will be crafted from brushed steel and mounted in a simple but elegant frame, inscribed with the words, "Innovation saved by respect," in clean modern lettering. Beneath the inscription, I envision a sculptural representation of a mouse click, an artistic homage to the pivotal moment that could have been my professional end, but instead became my genesis as an independent innovator and leader. The piece will be abstract enough to be beautiful, while concrete enough to remind every visitor of an important truth. This installation will stand as a powerful reminder to everyone who enters our workspace that the smallest actions can echo through entire careers and reshape whole industries. It will communicate that leadership decisions, whether made in a moment of anger or a flash of inspiration, have consequences that extend far beyond their immediate impact. The plaque will serve as a testament to the idea that dismissive gestures and careless deletions can destroy years of careful work. But they can also liberate creative minds to build something far greater than what was lost. That evening, as I lock up the office and step into the warm embrace of the evening breeze, I find myself humming an old melody that I used to play on my guitar during my college years. It's a musical habit I had abandoned completely during the frenzy of deadlines, corporate politics, and the endless pursuit of approval at Vail Consulting. The chords feel rough and unfamiliar beneath my mental fingers after so many years of neglect. But beneath the rustiness flows a quiet joy that I had almost forgotten existed. It's the satisfaction that comes from living a life rebuilt on authenticity rather than external validation. The contentment that emerges when your professional identity aligns perfectly with your personal values. Across the street from our office building, I notice the steady glow of a construction crew working under bright floodlights, carefully raising the framework for new apartment buildings. Each brick they place represents human effort and collective vision, the patient work of building something substantial and lasting from the ground up. I smile at the beautiful symmetry of the scene. Just as those buildings will rise from solid foundations laid with care and precision, my career has risen from the bedrock of a single consequential click that taught me the difference between seeking approval and earning respect. Walking home through the quiet evening streets, I pause at the ornate wrought iron gate of my apartment complex. I trace the elegant scrollwork with my fingertip, appreciating the craftsmanship and attention to detail that went into creating something both functional and beautiful. Inside those gates lies a life I chose deliberately for myself. Mornings filled with purpose and creative challenge, afternoons devoted to meaningful collaboration, and evenings of quiet reflection and personal growth. It's a life built on my own terms rather than shaped by someone else's expectations or limitations. I think back to that pivotal day when I offered Harrison Vail the flash drive containing my supposedly deleted work and told him with quiet conviction, "I'm walking out of the shadow you cast over everything I do." That decision had felt like stepping boldly from darkness into light, leaving behind a world of conditional approval for one of authentic recognition. Tonight, I stand firmly planted in that light, completely unafraid of future deletions while remaining constantly mindful of the power they can wield. I've learned that preparation and backup systems are essential, but more importantly, I've discovered that the greatest protection against destructive forces is building something so valuable and well-supported that it becomes irreplaceable. As I unlock my front door, the familiar and comforting scent of home envelops me like a warm embrace. The lingering aroma of dinner, the faint fragrance of books and paper, the soft electronic hum of technology that serves rather than dominates my personal space. I take a moment to fully absorb the peaceful atmosphere of my personal sanctuary, feeling deeply grateful for the journey that brought me to this place of contentment and purpose. There's something profoundly satisfying about being surrounded by objects and spaces that reflect your authentic self rather than someone else's expectations or social pressures. In my kitchen, I fill a tall glass with cool, refreshing water and raise it in a silent toast to the pivotal click that echoed across my entire life and career. It's a moment of acknowledgement for the paradox of destruction leading to creation, of professional setback becoming personal breakthrough. Tomorrow, I will stand before hundreds of consulting leaders from around the world, sharing insights about innovation, resilience, and the courage required to build something new when others try to tear down what you've created. I'll speak about the importance of nurturing ideas that might otherwise be dismissed, and I'll challenge them to create environments where creativity thrives rather than merely survives. But for now, in this quiet moment at the end of a remarkable day, I am simply home. I'm surrounded by the tangible proof that when respect guides innovation and authentic relationships form the foundation of business success, no careless click of erasure can truly silence the promise of what can be saved, nurtured, and transformed into something extraordinary. I set the glass down on my kitchen counter and move toward my bedroom, feeling the deep satisfaction that comes from a day well spent in service of something larger than myself. The echo of that deletion click may still exist somewhere in the archives of my memory, but it has been transformed from a source of pain into a reminder of possibility. In the end, I've learned that the most powerful response to someone trying to delete your contributions is not anger or revenge, but the patient work of building something so valuable and well-crafted that it becomes impossible to ignore or dismiss. Success, when it's built on authentic respect and genuine innovation, speaks louder than any criticism and lasts longer than any attempt at professional destruction. As I prepare for sleep, I reflect on how this story began with a single moment of deletion and has evolved into a testament to the power of persistence, creativity, and the courage to walk away from situations that no longer serve your highest potential. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is the push you need to discover just how capable you really are when you stop seeking their approval and start building your own legacy. The morning sun will rise tomorrow on new opportunities, fresh challenges, and the continued growth of something that started as a deleted file and became a movement that's changing how entire industries think about human relationships and technological innovation. And I'll be ready to meet whatever comes next, grounded in the knowledge that respect earned through excellence is the most solid foundation anyone can build upon. The end. This story reminds us that sometimes our greatest setbacks become the catalyst for our most significant breakthroughs. When someone tries to delete your dreams, use it as motivation to build something even better.